Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Britton's Hanging Out, episode 177. I'm here with Joseph V. Logsdon today, who runs a YouTube channel. Is also a writer who wrote stuff, who's written stuff. Is it called The Agony and the Ecstasy, or is that another book?
No. That's the 1965 film starring Charlton Heston. No, that's not what I wrote.
No, it has
Yeah,
ecstasy in it, doesn't it?
yeah, no, but you're confusing the title there. That's a night. No, mine is called The Ecstasy and the Ignominy. That's my book. It's that
Oh,
The Ecstasy and the Ignominy. What you're thinking of is the 1965 film starring Charlton Heston
oh well,
about
that's
the 16th chapel.
that's embarrassing. But yeah, that book, The
No,
Ecstasy and the
no, the ecstasy,
Anonymity.
ignominy, the ecstasy, and ignominy is hard to say. It's hard to pronounce. I will grant that, but it basically means moral shame. The ecstasy and the ignominy, because in the book there's essentially two forces. There's the ecstasy, the romance between Catherine and Edward, the forbidden romance, and the ignominy, the shame of that, but also the shame, the moral degradation of the town and the revolution and all of that. And so it's those two opposing themes together. That's why it's called the ecstasy and the ignominy. I got the word ignominy actually from reading Nathaniel Hawthorne, The Scarlet Letter, and he uses the word ignominious a lot. It's probably his favorite word. So I borrowed it from that, and so that's what the title of the book means.
Yeah, no, I feel kind of embarrassed now. I just totally butchered your book's name. I'm so sorry. I'm like, I'm like, is the agony? That doesn't sound right. I think that's another book or movie
Yeah,
or whatever.
yeah,
Oh man. Anyway, but you wrote that. I think you've written
yeah.
some other things as well.
Yes, I've written seven books. Well, I've written okay. If you go through my entire oeuvre, so to speak, first thing I wrote was a short story collection called Dark Tales of Mystery and Crime, and that book though is very different than how I write now. It was essentially an experiment in minimalism, which I don't really write in anymore. And then I wrote The Rains of Godwin Valley, which I tried to get traditionally published. That didn't quite work out. It was kind of a Western book. And then I wrote Empty Sounds of the Wind, which was a novella. And then I wrote Symphony of Perdition, which is kind of a psychological novella thriller. I wrote Mournful Wanderer, which was kind of a gothic tale similar to Turn of the Screw and all of that, about a woman who's haunted by the ghost of her dead son. And then I wrote A Silent Reckoning, which is somewhat like The Great Gatsby, about an actress trying to reclaim her fame.
Mm.
And and then I actually wrote that on a typewriter that's sitting right in front of me there. The whole thing on a typewriter, the rough draft. And then I wrote The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, which has a very Shakespearean, Melvillian, Dickensian tone to it, somewhat of a romantic, a poetic tone to it. I was heavily inspired by the romantic poets with the book, and that book is somewhat of an amalgamation of everything that I've learned, put into one book, written in a classical style, reminiscent of the classics. It's essentially a love letter to all the literature that I love.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I found your channel from a video you made recently about I'm forgetting the name of it. Let me see if I can find it here. It's not literary canon authors I can't stand. But that was an interesting video to get through. It was fun.
Yeah, well, the thing,
Not a Hemingway guy.
yeah, no. Well, the thing about that book is that I mean about that video is that the videos that tend to get the most attention are the negative videos. And when you say something positive about authors, not as many people watch. You know that. But the thing is with that book is that especially you mentioned Hemingway, is that I am essentially the very opposite of Hemingway, because I do not believe in minimalism or this notion that writing should be solely utilitarian. I think that it can work in small doses for contrast, but my philosophy is that writing should be aesthetically poetic and beautiful, not minimalist. And my dislike is not so much Hemingway himself, really. It's just that his influence and what he represents more than anything else.
So like you're not like a fan of like the. I don't want to assume anything, so you can feel free to correct me if you want. But it's like so you're not like a fan of like that noir kind of. Well, noir is kind of where Hemingway's influence is really
Well, that's a
persisted,
little different. Yeah, well, that's a little different
but
because
it is kind of influenced by that kind of minimalism, at least
yeah.
a good amount of
Well,
time.
I think that. Yeah, I think the difference with noir and in my short story collection, I actually wrote like that actually a long time ago.
Oh, well.
But the difference with noir is that noir can be rhythmic, hard-boiled. It's not necessarily always traditionally poetic, but I wouldn't classify it as necessarily the same as Hemingway. I mean, there
No,
are
I
some
agree. I was just using
similarities.
short term. I was just,
Yeah, yeah, but like I've read, for example, James M. Cain, and although he's not highly descriptive or poetic like me, there is a rhythm to noir writing that I think that is not purely minimalist, and
hmm
so I wouldn't put noir in the same category. And one misconception about me I want to clear up is that I am not always maximally poetic. I do write in that rhythmic, hard-boiled style at times, but I have a preference for the other kind of style, and it's more of a mixture in my writing. So I want to make that clear. There's a common misconception about me that I'm always maximally poetic. I am often, but not always.
I can't find the video at the moment, but my main point was I found your video where you were talking about how a lot of books aren't really like stylistically interesting anymore. Very much giving a massive paraphrase here. You can feel free to again, you can feel free to correct me and add context, but I thought it was interesting because I'm actually thinking about making a similar video, not quite in that sense, but more of a lot of like I'm not entirely how I put this. Ever since Cormac McCarthy died, which I don't know what you think about Cormac McCarthy. Maybe you like him, maybe you don't. I don't know. He's a very interesting author because he can do maximalist, but he can also do very kind of spare type of prose. But
Yeah.
I just haven't seen a similar artist who is that distinct in the field at the moment. And I don't know if we'll ever see an artist that distinct again. Like I don't
Well,
know if we'll see like a Vladimir Nabokov or I mean I haven't
yeah,
read much of Penchon. I guess Penchon's still alive, so I mean I don't know what you think of Penchon, but
yeah. Well, my opinion on McCarthy is that he definitely had talent, but I actually made a video about him saying that he was overrated. You
oh well.
know, I got some flack for that, but and overrated. A lot of people take the term overrated to mean bad author, which is not the same thing, you know. But the thing is that I mean, if you compare McCarthy to most modern authors, he's pretty great, you know. But if you compare him to the classical authors, my problem with him is that he sometimes I think I made a video critiquing the opening of Blood Meridian and how I thought that it did not draw me in personally when I read it. It's not a
hmm
critique of everything he's ever written. I'm not saying that it's a critique of everything he's ever written. I'm saying that the opening I thought was rather clunky and blunt, and if you didn't know it was Cormac McCarthy, you likely would not have been moved by it. And then I did the opening from my book, the Ecstasy and well, I'll just go ahead and read it, which is because I just have the book here.
Oh yeah, feel free.
And it's the first page. Love does not wait for time to dream. It is too fragile of an art. It sails on the shattered hopes of poets and gods, a pageantry unseen and a story untold. In the end, a type of silence emerges that transcends thought and memory. It is the emptiness we feel when the Promethean spark of nature goes out and the world becomes cold and mirthless. Passion withers into a forgotten harmony, and nothing, not even the angels above, can make the music play again. For beauty has fallen from heaven, and we are alone in the mist. Now, I think that's a very powerful opening. It's a mixture of beauty and melancholy and Catherine's state of mind about how she's essentially unhappy in her marriage and this cold industrial town. And I just found it to be I found that opening, and it took me a while to get it right, to be so captivating and moving. I just felt, of course, I don't have McCarthy's opening right here with me, but I just felt that his was rather dry and soulless. And I just think that he somehow, people like McCarthy can have a reputation where people can think that their writing is always better than perhaps it actually is. And I'm not saying he's a terrible writer. And I also think my problem with McCarthy is the fact that he essentially appeals to a very narrow group of essentially mostly not exclusively, but mostly male readers, and it's about violence and violence and the West and all that. And it's a perfectly legitimate genre, but I find him too narrow where he doesn't speak necessarily. And I haven't read all of his work, but when it comes to something like Blood Meridian specifically, it doesn't speak necessarily to the universal human heart. And again,
Oh,
it sounds like it sounds like I dislike McCarthy. I don't. I'm not saying I dislike him. I'm just saying that I think he's somewhat overrated, and
mm,
that's what I'm saying.
okay. I found it. It's called "Why Modern Writers Lack Literary Ambition." I thought it was an interesting video
Yes, yes, okay, yes.
because because I actually agree. I've been considering making a video of a similar type, not necessarily about what you talked about, but more of mine is kind of wondering like who is the next like great writer going to be? Who's going to be that next Nabokov? Who's going to be that
Hmm.
next McCarthy? And there are some really
Yeah,
excellent writers who are working today. At least in my opinion. I don't know what you think on it, but
yeah. Well,
but like
the thing is,
but I
the
don't
thing is,
know if they
yeah.
but there hasn't
Hmm.
been like a transcendent talent yet. That's what I'm getting
Hmm.
at.
Yes, I understand you. Well, the the thing is that I know this sounds really presumptuous, and I don't want to say it, but the thing is that I am at least striving to be a great writer in that way. And one of the things that, because I actually think that when it comes, I am the only that I can think of at least writer who is writing serious literary fiction who is self-published, who has who has like social media, who's trying to get my work out there, who's trying to get my work out to the public, doing it independently. I'm really the only writer like that I can really think of in my space. Like for example, I'm on TikTok a lot, because the reason I'm on TikTok a lot, not just YouTube, is because I find I can I can converse with a lot of author peers there, but most of the people there, of course, are in the romance genre, the thriller genre, those kinds
Mm-hmm.
of genres. But they're not really seeking, they're not really seeking literary ambition like I am. And if you've seen some of my more recent videos, you know that I do believe there is what you might call a hierarchy within literature. That some writing is more beautiful. Um, some writers are more talented than others. I definitely subscribe to someone like Nietzsche in that regard.
Mm.
That talent is ingrained, and that we shouldn't pretend that everyone is equal, and that egalitarianism is ruined. And I do believe in some ways that egalitarianism is ruining literature. And I also believe that I on some level I think do have a gift for poetic language, a natural gift, and that I do think that I am, at least talent wise, a great writer in that sense within the hierarchy that I've laid out. So that's my view on things like talent and hierarchy and so on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was actually gonna. I still am writing that part of the video, but my thing was actually gonna start out with a Nietzsche quote, basically, where he's talking about. Well, it was the "God is dead" quote, which I think is a very misunderstood quote. Because he wasn't like it wasn't like an atheist creed. What he was saying was that okay, well, this is kind of dying out. I mean, I disagree on that, but we won't go into that. What are we gonna do now? It's like what are we gonna what are we gonna use to replace it basically, and that's kind of where I
Hmm.
wanted to take my video. So there's some foreshadowing for whenever people watch this, or if I put it out before this. There you go. There's me talking about it. But um,
Well, I think we need to differentiate, and this is how I differentiate between, let's say, like I have what you might call a very what you uh, a materialist view of talent and ability, where I think that a lot of talent and ability is down to complex neurology, and not everyone has the same. Some people have neurology that is more attuned to language, and some people don't. But I think that I want to distinguish and differentiate between, let's say, my kind of materialist theories on talent and human value and worth, because those are two separate questions. And quite often there's a tension between my because I am at heart still a Christian, but there's often sometimes can be a tension between my Christian beliefs and my Nietzsche beliefs. But how I square it is that when I speak of Nietzsche, I'm talking about beauty, talent, that sort of thing. Some people are more beautiful than others. That doesn't mean you're more valuable than others in the moral sense. And I think Nietzsche was very good at critiquing kind of egalitarianism and soft and sentimental versions of Christianity. But I think ultimately Christianity still provides a moral framework that Nietzsche's, frankly does not. And so that's how I solve the tension there.
Interesting. I mean, I've only read a couple of Nietzsche stuff. I've only read like Beyond Good and Evil, if we're talking like Nietzsche, which is an excellent
Yeah.
book.
Well,
Um,
I've been reading Thus Spoke Zarathustra because it's more poetic, in that regard, and because Zarathustra is speaking as a poet, as a prophet, and Thus Spoke Zarathustra is kind of a manifesto for how Nietzsche wants people to behave in the world, and so that's the book I've been reading recently.
yes, I did notice you've been talking about Nietzsche quite a bit on your channel.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's something I've been kind of wrestling with myself because a lot of my favorite authors, have kind of I've noticed a theme where they talk about cultures just going into the toilet, and I'm like, and I wrestle with that, and I wonder if they're right because
Hmm.
I I mean, there's always been shallow entertainment. I don't think that's ever going to go away, but I feel like more and more we're kind of letting mediocrity.
Yes, well, there's this
We're
notion
we're
that
we're we're tolerating mediocrity, if you will.
yes, I do think that we are tolerant because to me, it's one of those things where if you say that everything is equal, if all writing is equal, if all beauty is equal, whether you're talking about, physical beauty, artistic beauty, and or whatever, then the concept of beauty or greatness loses its meaning, in many ways. And I also I think and I'm going to make a video about this sometime when it comes to my theories on beauty and all of that. For example, is that beauty to me in a hierarchy is not just physical. It can be literary, artistic, and all of that. Like for example, I can give you an example. if a ma- if a man, let's say, writes a beautiful, like say, love letter to a woman, and then he reads it to her, and she's moved by that and emotionally, then he to her, even if he's maybe physically average, he has what you might call a handsome mind that enhances her beauty, that reflects her beauty back to her, and that's another kind of beauty. And so when I talk about hierarchy of beauty, I'm talking about the physical, the mental, and some people, unfortunately, though, don't really have beauty of any kind, whether it's physical, mental, artistic, and people can be people can be reluctant to admit that. But I think that you have to admit it if you actually want artists to be great and not be held down by mediocrity, because I do believe that hierarchy exists in an objective sense.
Yeah, I mean, there is that kind of old quote from Theodore Sturgeon, the science fiction writer, where he says 95% of everything is crap. But
Yeah.
I've never really liked that quote though, because it's like, well, what's the point of reading then? I get the idea is probably that 5% that's good, but like, I
Yeah.
don't think like 95% of everything is bad. That's pretty
Well, it
bleak
depends.
proclamation.
Yeah, it depends on how you define it bad, because there's layers to quality.
Uh
Of
huh.
course, where you might say 95% of, or like there's the 5% that is really great, they're really beautiful. There's the other 20% or so that's good but not great, and then you have maybe the bottom 50% that is terrible. And so there's a hierarchy in that. It's not just terrible, beautiful, and great. There's a spectrum there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a weird thing. It's definitely yeah. I mean, there have been videos of people going like, "Oh, why aren't men reading, or why is literature turning to crap and whatnot." I'm just kind of I don't know what you think about all that, but
Yeah, well, the thing is about men not reading and all of that is that it's something that I didn't notice really until recently, because I do read.
oh yeah.
It's a, so it's one of those things where it's like, men aren't reading? What do you mean? I read, and it's one of those things where you have it where men tend to be captivated more by nonfiction philosophy. They are reading, but they tend to not read fiction as much. But the thing is, by only reading that, you miss you basically get theory, but you don't actually get exploration of the human condition, which is what great literature gives you. There's a reason, for example, why I didn't. I'm heavily interested in philosophy, but there's a reason why I decided not to become a philosopher because I knew that just becoming a philosopher, I wouldn't be able to study the human condition if I was boggled down by theory all the time. I had to actually live and experience the human condition, and that is something that mere philosophy cannot do. But I think that when you have a culture where men essentially have abandoned reading, then you get a culture where literature becomes you only get one kind of point of view, and I don't think that's good for literature as a whole.
Yeah, it's that's interesting. I mean, just recently I saw a video from a lady called Jumi Kim that's kind of been going around the internet. Maybe you've heard of this, but
Yeah, I have. I've watched the first few minutes of it, but I haven't watched all of it.
it was interesting because I don't really agree that it's like wokeness destroying literature, which I
No,
don't want to really
no,
go into that, but
no.
um, I do think she brought up an interesting point that is worth considering, though, which is I'm probably gonna get some side eyes for this, but there is a sense that I do think, like we were kind of dancing around, that there is a lot of conformity in literature now. Like, there's not really a lot of room for like truly radical voices, which is why the indie scene's kind of blown up in recent
Hmm.
years. Which some might say, oh, it's always been this way. I mean, I watched Man Carrying Things response to Jumi Kim's video where he showed like an essay that William Gass wrote about why the Pulitzer is full of shit, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
Um, but I thought that was an interesting point. I just don't think her response was that insightful. It's basically
No,
like,
yeah.
oh, look at the woke shit is bad, and I'm just like, okay, but
Yeah,
why? Why is
yeah,
it bad?
that's too simplistic of a view.
Exactly. Yeah.
It really is. And the term woke has become a term that could mean so many different things. I think that whenever you have essential, I think what she's really getting at, and this exists all across the political spectrum, is when the message matters more than exploring the human condition. But it's
Which
far
that's a
simpler than
legitimate critique.
yeah, but it's far simpler than just like you can have, for example, you can have for example, a lot of people might think that if you introduce homosexual characters of any kind, that means it's woke, which it often can be when they have progressive points of view. But I think that you can, in theory, and I hope to write some characters like this someday that are, let's say, homosexual, but let's say they may even have traditional or conservative values. They may be conservative on things like, I don't know, gender identity, that or whatever. And they may even be religious or morally pious, and yet they're still kind of comfortable in their sexuality. And I wouldn't call something like that, let's say, woke, even though it is unorthodox. And so I think that a lot of people they try to latch onto one thing that they might think, well, that sounds kind of progressive, but it isn't necessarily always. It depends entirely on the context.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I do think she did touch on something interesting, which they again there does seem to be kind of this. I don't even know how to describe it really. It kind of feels like it's kind of what you touched on in your video on why literary writers lack ambition. Um, in that it almost seems like you need to fill a particular like quota to be considered like a good writer, you know.
Hmm.
And that
Well,
was
there
probably
is this.
badly explained, but that's kind of how that is something I've
Yeah,
noticed. I do think that is something that should be discussed.
yeah. Well, I think that we have two kinds of literary worlds here. You kind of have what you might call the left wing, which is obsessed with this concept of identity over genuine literary quality. And then you have, yes, They're obsessed with identity over genuine related quality. Then you have the right, which doesn't seem to care about literature at all. They just want to burn it down. And 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 the thing is that to me it's like they're both, or they want some kind of white Eastern European civilization or whatever. But I'm thinking that both are basically engaging in what I would call mediocrity, where they are prioritizing other things than the beauty and the aesthetic. So I would condemn because my philosophy is if it's not about the beauty or the aesthetic, then I don't really care what your point is. And so that's my philosophy.
I mean, that's fair. I guess. Yeah, you do seem like you're very interested in like language and prose and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
Which going back to McCarthy, I'm curious if you read anything like Suttree, because Suttree is kind of him at his most maximalist. I find.
Yeah, I haven't read anything other than Blood Meridian, so I really
Oh,
can't speak
okay.
on it.
Okay, then I
Um,
won't say too much more. Then, but it's definitely going back to the subject. Yeah, it's definitely something I've pondered. I do think that's something that should be discussed. Though I don't know
mhm.
how we'd be able to discuss it without it just turning into political bickering, which is what
Yeah,
most of these people bringing up this conversation it's turned into. So there you
yes.
go.
Well, the thing is that there is an incentive on YouTube, as a YouTuber myself, to engage in what you might call polarizing content because that's what gets views. If you talk about what you love, if you talk about how to actually create and not just argue and bicker, that tends to not ignite people as much, and therefore you don't get the views that you need in order to sustain your channel and influence and sell books and all of that. So there's a real tension between talking about and creating what you love and actually trying to get people to watch your videos. There's a real tension. How I've been solving it is that I'll make a video that I know may ruffle some feathers. It's my opinion, but it's just me at my most critical. I'm not being fake about it. And then I'll make another where I'm like, okay, this one is more for me, what I want to explore. And it's a very delicate balance on YouTube trying to do that. But, recently I just got monetized actually.
Oh,
And so I'm
nice.
actually, yeah. So I'm making money from the channel now, and so there's even more of an incentive to try to balance those things when you're making money off of it, because it's one of those things where you want to keep your integrity as an author. You don't want to become, I don't want to become a rage bait channel by any means. That because a lot of author tube channels they become rage bait channels because that's what the algorithm awards and they lose their identity. But at the same time, I also recognize the reality that I want my channel to be seen, and so sometimes I have to lean into that a little, but not so much where it's not me anymore. And so it can be a very delicate balance there.
Yeah, and I think my real issue with like Jimmy Kim's video is that like one, it's clear she hasn't read a lot of the books that she was talking about. She's just making assumptions, which
Yes.
that doesn't
Hmm.
that you can just which if you do that you can just ignore it, which I think is like that just kills your argument if you're
Yeah.
just making assumptions about books. But also again,
Hmm.
I think she's going at it the wrong way. Right? I think she's approaching the issue from the wrong direction. I think that's a better way to put it.
So how so do you think?
Well, again, I think she's too focused on like identity politics rather than just like in like how like mediocre how people more than like talking about like oh yeah a lot of contemporary literature is kind of mediocre. We should probably do something about that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing is that because I think part of the reason why she comes from that angle is because if you frame something as identity politics, that gets people charged up. They want to know about that. If you just say literature is mediocre, well, a lot of people, especially if they don't read a lot, they don't have an opinion about that because they don't read to actually know if it's mediocre or not. But everyone has an
Fair. That's
opinion
a
about
fair
identity
point.
politics.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
And
Everyone has an opinion, yeah, about identity politics. Not everyone has an opinion about literature. And so one of the problems with YouTube is that it tends to reward the broadest engagement possible and not serious literary discussion.
that,
I will say that despite the fact that my channel is growing, I have found very few, at least people who comment, who I would actually say understand what I'm trying to do. I mean, there are a couple that I think do. There's one person who reviews my books now that they've reviewed a lot of my books that I really like them. I think they understand quite a lot of it, but most people don't. And so a lot of people who do, they may watch silently. Sometimes I'll get emails from people who've been watching my channel for months, and then they'll say, "Oh, I love this" or "I love that." So I'm inspired by that. I'm like, I don't know who you are. You've been watching for months, and I didn't. And so it's one of those things where people can silently watch. When it comes to the actual engagement, especially in the comments, I find things to still be, for the most part, relatively shallow, and so it's serious literary discussion on YouTube is quite difficult.
That's a fair point. Yeah, a lot of and I'm so fucking sick of this word, but a lot of people have called like Jumi Kim a grifter, which I'm just like I'm fucking tired of that word, honestly.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
I do see what you mean though, and that's probably why people think she's a grifter because, like, yeah, when you talk about identity politics, people are gonna get like inflamed about that.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that people again use inflammatory language to get views in some ways that may actually in some ways even be the it may be strong. They may their critique may be stronger than how they actually feel inside, but they're using that language in order to get views. And another point I wanted to mention, though, is that, like for example, if I wanted to, I'm sure that my channel could be much larger if I decided to critique, authors with known names, and draw attention to myself that way. But I don't, because I think I don't like attacking other people preemptively. It goes against my ethics, and I don't want to become a controversial channel in that way. The thing is that, for example, have you ever? I was tempted to do it once, and I did make one concession one time. For example, have you ever heard of the YouTuber? Not really a writer, but have you ever heard of the YouTuber Right Conscious?
Yes, yeah. I've actually
Yeah,
talked with him
yeah,
before.
yeah. I don't like him at all. um, um,
Yeah, I can see how he might. He definitely can be. What's a good word? I would say overwhelming, but I think there's a better word for it.
um, well, I think in many ways he's I think he I don't like using the word pretentious because I think it's overblown, but it would definitely apply to him.
Ha!
But
Well,
but
that's
yeah. The thing is, because pretentious usually means you're pretending to have more talent than you
overblown.
actually
Maybe is a
have.
good word. He could definitely
Yeah,
be.
yeah.
What?
Well, condescending especially, though he can definitely be condescending, pretend all of that. Because the thing is, what happened with him is that I used to be a follower of his channel. I watched his videos, but then I commented on one time he gave writing advice about something about consistency or something like that and how you can grow your channel. And I made a comment where I said, well, being consistent really hasn't worked for me. Not criticizing his advice, just saying, well, I was just vainly venting. I wasn't really criticizing him. But the thing is that then he made a video where he essentially said that mentioned me. He didn't mention me by name, but it was clearly me that he was talking about. Where he said, well, the reason he had, and this was over a year ago, but the reason he hasn't succeeded is that his technical production quality is bad. His titles are bad, his production and all, and that's the reason.
I mean,
And
I mean to be
and
fair,
and
few people call their books "The Ecstasy and the Ignominies." I'm just kidding, by the way.
what
That is kind of a mouthful of a title, though.
Well, yes, but it's a mouthful of a title, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad
No,
title
it's
by
not a
any
bad
any
title.
stretch of the imagine
I'm
any
just
stretch of the
teasing, of course.
imagination.
Just
No,
teasing.
no, I'm just saying is
Just
that
teasing.
the ecstasy. Well, the reason I titled it that is the reason I titled it that is because you're supposed to actually struggle and remember the language, and the thing is that it's a title that you remember. It's not a title that it's
Even
not it's
though,
not a title.
even though I
Yeah,
butchered it again, I'm so
yeah,
sorry
yeah,
about that.
yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. But it's a title. Yeah, but it's a title that sticks with you though once you hear it. Because it's a title where that kind of indicates what the book is. That this is going to be a book full of difficult language. You know,
Hmm.
and it's basically trying to prepare you for that because it is what I would call a maximalist title,
Hmm.
and the book is full of maximalist language, and so it's not meant to be a smooth title where it just runs off the tongue like that. It's supposed to be a title that actually challenges your cognitive abilities to a degree and takes you to a higher sense of beauty that you really haven't even experienced before, and its work operates on that level, not on what we would call a normative level. And so that's was my purpose. But what he was criticizing though wasn't the title of my books; it was the title of the videos. And the thing is though is that he didn't even say, he said I didn't have titles, which was, I think, just poorly awarded phrase, because of course I have titles, But the thing is though is that I found it was incredibly arrogant, and I thought rude.
Yeah, that's
Um,
definitely
you
true.
know, incredibly arrogant. I thought rude because I didn't ask for his advice, at all. And he's just, and someone who, at least at that time, someone with a power imbalance, who was trying to like critique one of. I was just saying that's very low for one thing, and I just felt that it felt like such a betrayal. And the thing is though is that I feel like he is in no place to has no authority to criticize really anybody, because the thing is with him is that he as far as I know has never even published anything that he's written, and has no authority whatsoever to critique the work of other writers when he hasn't even proven himself at all. What he does is that he hides behind the work of other writers who are greater than he is. That's all he is. And so in my estimation, he is in fact a hack in many ways. Yeah, that's what he is. I would say he's a hack. That's the word.
Heck.
And that's what I think of him. And the thing was is that he actually I have heard him say in videos that he wants authors authors like me of my caliber out there. But the thing is that I think I am an author of the caliber that he would like if he gave me a chance. But I'm never giving him a chance now. Like if he invited me on a podcast, I would never go on his podcast because he's burned that bridge with me. He's
Yeah, no,
completely burned it.
I had a similar experience, not with Right Conscious, but I won't say who it was, but I sent an email to a guy who I'd been
Mm,
friendly, who I watch on YouTube, and I was quite friendly with. I had him on my podcast before, we,
mm,
you know, and I
yeah.
sent him because he was like, yeah, it's been kind of a dark time and whatever. He was talking about the current situations and stuff, and I sent him an email going like, oh, I hope you're doing well. Just wanted to
Hmm.
email you. Then he makes a video about email etiquette. And again, I can't say for sure that it's about me, but he used specific things I said in my email. And I was like,
Yeah.
"Are you fucking kidding me?" Like it was very
Yeah.
it was very hurtful. Is what I'm trying to say.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I can definitely see that. And I especially don't know why you would want to actually try to go after people who are friendly to you or trying to help you. Like to me, that doesn't make any sense.
I don't know. I don't
You
know.
know, it doesn't make, yeah.
Most people I've met on BookTube are pretty cool people. I've had a couple of. This wasn't a booktuber, but the science fiction critic Damian Walter. Really smart guy, very intelligent, knows what he's talking about. Massive cocksucker though, just
Yeah.
massive fucking cocksucker.
Yeah.
He's
Well, one of the problems I have with a lot of booktubers, and this is not regulated to booktube per se, but it's the thing is where people try to create too much of a brand, where they're more of a brand than an actual person.
yeah, no,
And
I see what you mean by that. Yeah,
yeah, and like for example, I have some like friends, okay, on YouTube, TikTok, or whatever, they'll never comment on my channel publicly, never. They might email me or private message me occasionally, but it's like they can't be seen commenting on the videos of other peers, because that somehow would lower them or degrade them because of the popularity of their channel. And therefore it can come, and that kind of distance I don't think is good for a literary community, and it's not something that I do. I try to treat every. I don't recognize these, because here's the thing. Even though I do have a hierarchy in terms of like aesthetics and beauty and all of that, when it comes to how I actually treat people, I try to treat everyone with kindness and respect. And I don't like this idea of being a brand, and the brand replacing the 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 person. I try to be. I do have a brand, so to speak, but I don't make a differentiation there. Some people try to hide behind their brand, thinking that somehow being mysterious is better, but in many cases, it just makes it look like you don't care.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, no, I get what you mean. I've definitely seen booktubers who are like really interested in like making a brand, and I'm just like, you're kind of destroying the reason I watched your channel to begin with, dude.
Yeah,
Like, come on,
exactly.
come on.
Hmm.
It's like, Anyway, I mean, I don't exactly. Some of your video title, I haven't watched all of them, but there's definitely some I'd like to watch, like your Charles Dickens videos, because I quite like
Yeah.
Dickens myself. I read him when I was a kid. Like Oliver Twist is one of my favorite stories of all
Hmm.
time.
Yeah,
Even though I think A
I
Tale of Two Cities is like his best like single novel, I think that's his masterpiece. But like Oliver Twist is my personal favorite if we're talking
well,
Dickens.
yeah. Well, the ecstasy and the ignominy is partially was partially inspired by the Tale of Two Cities because it has to do with, but it's a communist kind of revolution instead of the French Revolution,
Hmm.
where you have the workers who are rising up and they're trying to take over the town, and then you have the character of Catherine who has the adulterous affair with Edward, all of that. But I won't don't want to give it away. But essentially,
It's always
she is, and she's
affairs. That's how you know it's a
yeah,
true classic inspired. There's an
yeah,
affair.
yeah, yeah. Well, and the thing is though is that she is in some ways, I don't want to give it away, but and she is so much more than this, but she is kind of almost a female version of Sydney Carton,
Uh
from
huh.
yeah, and so and because it's one of those things where it's kind of like, well, normally in books you have the man who sacrifices. Well, in this, it's the woman who sacrifices, so that's the difference.
Yeah, one of your videos is called "Charles Dickens is Darker Than You Think." I'm really wanting to get to that. I might have to watch it after we're done here, but
Yeah.
I'm so like I'm really looking forward to it because I actually would agree with that. I think Charles Dickens
Hmm.
is much darker than people give him credit for, and it's really
Hmm.
frustrating people don't see it because a lot of people like
Hmm.
to think of Dickens as this kind of saccharine, very or not melancholy. I don't want to say
Sentimental.
melodramatic,
Sentimental.
sentimental. Yes,
They send him as sentimental.
like
Um,
Oscar Wilde said very similar things, and I'm just like, if you read his work, he is pissed. Like he is
yes,
There's an
especially
anger in his books.
especially yeah, especially his later work. His later work can especially be like that. I'm now reading Bleak House, which
Oh
I actually
yeah,
have not read until now. I just started reading
that's
it.
one of
I'm
his
about a
longer ones, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about 1,000 pages. It's going to take me a
Jesus.
while. Yeah. Um, but the thing is, if you look at, for example, the mystery of Edwin Drood, which he didn't finish,
Hmm.
which you have the character of Jasper, who's the music teacher of Edwin Drood, and he's obsessed with Rosa Budd, lusting after Rosa Budd in a very kind of dark way. In fact, I actually, in the book I'm writing now, which is the disappearance of Richard Blackwood, even though it's set in 17th century Puritan New England,
Ooh, that actually
and
sounds like
even
something I'd
though
like.
the
Tell me more about this. Sorry, or
yeah,
continue your point, but tell me more about that when you're done with
yeah,
your point.
yeah, yeah, well, yes, well, you have Reverend Fletcher, who is entirely obsessed with the character of Eleanor, who is a woman in the town that's married to Richard Blackwood, who's married to Richard Blackwood, who she cannot who she can. Sorry, there was some kind of noise behind me, but anyway, the thing is, she's married to Richard Blackwood, and Reverend Fletcher is obviously becomes obsessed with her in a dark sort of kind of like in the same way that you Jasper is obsessed with Rosa Budd, but in much darker, much more psychologically complex than that. One of the things that I often do in my book is that I take the kind of dark complexity of something like the mystery of Edwin Drood, and then I take it to darker and much more psychologically complex places they couldn't go then for obvious reasons. Um, and the thing is about this though is that essentially the book, The Disappearance of Richard Blackwood, is about the character of Eleanor Blackwood, who her husband Richard Blackwood say left her when she was with child, and she and to be a merchant, and then she lost the child. He comes back, but now she's entirely cold because she just cannot forgive him, and at this point she will not forgive anybody because she's and that's her essential flaw. She cannot forgive, but because of that, she becomes susceptible to the philosophy of Reverend Fletcher, who essentially develops a philosophy where it's kind of a Nietzschean version of Calvinism,
Hmm.
where it's one of those
Interesting.
where it's one of those things like God secretly, according to him, wants you to sin because and that the rules that God gives out, those are for lower men who cannot rise above it. And so the higher man
Uh-huh.
sins in order to attain glory with God, and in some cases maybe even surpass God. He becomes as God, so to speak. And so the conclusion is very Nietzschean in its tone, and
Interesting.
Eleanor's yeah. And so Eleanor is slowly seduced by this, even though she resists at first because of her common Puritan piety. But she ultimately becomes seduced by Reverend Fletcher, which leads her down quite a dark path. And of course, there's a lot of other things happen, but they're spoiling, so I'll end it there. And then you have another character who called Anne, who Anne is a blind servant. She comes to New England and she's Anne's servant for a time, but Anne is kind of a counterweight where she has a faith that is less cultural, more pure in tone. But one of the secrets there is that she has, I won't say who it is, but she has a father who she doesn't know it's her father, who is this someone who I kind of base somewhat off of Roger Chillingworth
Mm.
from the Scarlet
Mm-hmm.
Letter, and also a little bit of he's a little bit of Iago as well from Shakespeare,
Mm.
and he
Mm-hmm.
and he and he yeah, and he essentially is the and he originally was what you might call a romantic poet. I'm not a romantic, but an Elizabethan poet from England, because a lot of people think Elizabethan Puritan time periods as being different, but no, like if you take someone who was alive in the 1590s, they could be an elderly person in the 1640s, and a lot of people don't realize that. And so you have basically a man though who has been embittered by time and the way the church and the crown have betrayed him, and so therefore he uses Reverend Fletcher, kind of whispers in his ear as a vessel in order to get back at all the things that
This sounds like
destroyed him.
this sounds really interesting. I'll have to check it out
Yeah,
whenever you put it out because I
yeah.
should just say this. I'm actually working on a book. I was actually working on it before we're on here, but
Mm.
I'm actually really fascinated by Puritanism, like just the
Yeah.
weird costumes, the beliefs they had, the
Hmm.
history. John Milton was a Puritan. Very fascinating
Hmm.
stuff, I think,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Well, I'm
especially
trying to
when in like
repay.
early colonial America, you're like,
Hmm.
and they just went crazy, or they kind of went crazy because they were in a land they didn't know, and they're like, "What's out there?" And they now
Yeah.
I think the Puritans get a bad rep because I think that
Hmm.
Salem gave them a bad rep. I think Puritans deserve more credit than they get. Yes, Salem was bad, but they did a lot of really great things too,
Yeah.
like
They were
uh
at they.
like freedom of speech and stuff like that.
Well,
You
they
can thank the
weren't. Yeah.
Puritans
Well,
for
they were.
that.
Yeah. Well, they weren't exact. Well, freedom of speech as long as it agrees with my religious
Well, yeah, that's true.
interpretation. Um, but no, it was more freedom of speech for us, not for you. But they did engage in what you might call a rich intellectual tradition. There's some Puritan poetry that is really beautiful. They were not they were not unintelligent by any shape of the
Yeah,
imagination.
no,
They were
exactly.
high,
Yeah.
you know, they were highly intelligent. And and I think that they had a culture that was beautiful in many ways, aesthetically, but also very conservative and very rigid. But the thing is with the Puritans is that there's two layers. There's the rigidity on the surface, but then there's the kind of darkness and transgression underneath. One of the things that you'll find is that when they talk about the Salem witch trials, for example, in Puritan New England, is that the thing is that there were, I mean, I don't think there was witchcraft, probably, but anyway, um there were what you might call people who were secret non-believers, atheists, even Satan worshipers, in the town who kept their beliefs hidden. And some of that is what kind of stirred the whole Salem witch trials, where innocent people were being executed. Most of the people who were executed were innocent, but there was somewhat of a real base to it that gets overlooked at times.
Yeah,
Um,
no, like a lot of the interesting like I've wanted to get like one of the I think it's Cotton Mathers who wrote it, but it was basically a book about demons. and people took this very seriously. And
Yeah.
it wasn't like crackpot stuff. Like it was very like apparently like very
Hmm.
like philosophical. Like very like
Yeah.
they weren't stupid, is what you were saying, and I agree. They
Yeah,
definitely
exactly.
weren't.
No.
Um,
And they often had you'll actually find that a lot of the people actually assessing the witchcraft and things actually tried to apply evidential reasons before they accepted that. A lot of the executions were done more for political reasons, for and for the judges at the top executed people for political expediency, and it really had more to do with that than actual belief in the witchcraft itself. A lot of it was political. Um,
have you
and
read
and
like The
so
Crucible at all?
Oh yes, I've read The Crucible. I've seen the film. I actually, when I was in high school, I actually read the part of Judge Danforth.
Oh yeah.
So, so as Paul,
I'll admit I know you like Nathaniel Hawthorne, but I actually like The Crucible a lot more than The Scarlet Letter personally. So there you go.
um, well, it's a different kind of tale
Yeah.
because the Scarlet Letter is more psychological about the romance between Hester Prynne and Reverend Dimsdale, and it's far more psychological and introspective. The Crucible is far more sociological about
This is
about about
true.
what
Yeah.
about what can happen to into a world, a civilization. And what I'm doing in my book is that I'm combining a lot of those elements. You'll find a lot of those elements. One of the things though that I'm finding difficult now is because the character of Anne, I'm in a pickle right now because I'm writing chapter 26 where the character of Anne is a point of view character, and she's blind, and I made her blind because she actually has more. She has a kind of she has a faith that is pure, that relies on her heart, not her physical senses. But I actually, because I'm such a visual writer, in the chapter I'm working on for the first half, I actually forgot that she was blind,
Oh no.
and so that I started describing sight, and then really good descriptions, beautiful descriptions. I realized like wait a minute, what am I actually doing here? And so now I'm going to finish the chapter, but afterwards I'm going to have to go back and rewrite some of it. But what I'm trying to do now though is that I'm trying to, instead of just get rid of the descriptions, I'm trying to take what was sight descriptions and kind of convert them into like what you might call a sound or touch or smell equivalent. But she's definitely the hardest character I have ever written because she doesn't have, and it's not that I can't write a blind character as long as I remember that she's
No,
blind.
you just
And
forgot.
so,
It's fine.
yeah,
I
yeah,
get that, but
yeah,
but yeah, no. Kind of going back to my original point though, like when you read like Charles Dickens, he is really pissed off.
yeah, he is.
Like
Yeah,
he
he
is
definitely is.
angered. Like there, and you can feel that anger kind of. It's really weird. Like I've noticed a similar thing with like I don't know how much fantasy you read at all, but Joe Abercrombie, he's written stuff like The First Law, and a lot of people say he's like nihilistic, but like again, if you read his books, you'll find he's really pissed off like at the world and how these
Yeah.
systems of power, you know, do this. I find Dickens does a very similar thing. Maybe not as gritty as a Joe
Um,
Abercrombie, but very much a
yeah.
very intense, angry work. That is filtered through humor.
Yeah. Well, the thing is with Dickens is that, have you read Our Mutual Friend?
No, not yet. I've only read. Let me see what
Yeah.
I've read. I've read Oliver Twist. I've read A Tale of Two Cities, and a good amount of his. Like I've read A Christmas Carol. I try to read that on
Yeah.
Christmas time.
Have you read Great Expectations?
No, but I want to read that one next.
Yeah, it's his best book, in my estimation, because it's essentially about, you have the criminal. I probably can't give it away now, but the thing is, you have the criminal Magwitch who comes after Pip when he's a little boy and essentially haunts him all of his life. And you have the character of Estella, who's this unattainable, dream that he can't have, and all of that. And some people think that Estella may have been based on, forget her name at this point, but the woman who became Dickens's very likely mistress later in life.
Yeah.
And Dickens was in some ways somewhat of a hypocrite, in the sense that he promoted all of these notions of equality, but yet he essentially treated his wife horribly, and like put her away, so to speak, where he wouldn't even let most of his children see her while he had this affair, so to speak. Which for the artist, it is really difficult because it's one of those things where I have mixed feelings about Dickens because for the artist is that it's very difficult for the artist to be constrained when it comes to common notions of domesticity because
That's true.
for the because and that's not a warrant for licentiousness. That's not what I'm saying. But but the thing is it's this idea that the artist, the poet wants to experience deep, poetic, soulful love, and sometimes domesticity can interfere with that. So it's one of those things where Dickens, yes, was very too harsh, so to speak, but at the same time, and hypocritical, but at the same time, you can kind of sympathize with him at the same time. So it's very nuanced. He was a very nuanced man and far more complicated morally than people give him credit for.
Yeah, and it's a he's a very I think he's a very interesting writer because he again kind of combines that anger with humor, and you see that
Hmm.
and he
Yeah.
was an entertainer. I think that's why a lot of people kind of get thrown off by him. He was kind of, he was kind of he was kind of a pulp writer before pulp writing was a thing, kind of.
Hmm.
Kind of.
Yeah.
I might
Well, the
piss off
thing,
some Dickens aficionados by saying
yeah.
that though.
Well, it's one of those things where by today's standards, he's very complex, but by the standards of the 19th century, he was known as being, an accessible writer. But the thing is, you have to remember, people then, people who read him anyway, were far more literate and attuned to language than the modern world, is.
This is
And so
true. Yeah.
they could handle complete. One of the things that bothers me so much now is the fact that people want to take everything literally. And so you can't even make a simple metaphor. And people have like just to give like the moon wept without some people saying the moon doesn't cry. What do you mean? And people will say that seriously. And then I've gotten critiques like, well, you need an editor because an editor would know to say would tell you that the moon doesn't cry. And it's and it's like and it's like that they read. I get comments like this all the time. I mean, I really do, and it's really frustrating because people want to read everything like an instruction manual. They don't know how to read abstractly now, and so Dickens was the thing that's great about Dickens is that he was one of the few writers who attained a lot of popularity within his own lifetime. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's one of those things where I would love to have like if some people ask you, of course, who would you want to trade lives with? Well, I wouldn't want to trade lives literally with Dickens, but to have the kind of literary fame and influence that he to actually go around and lecture, because one of the things that I would love to do, one of the things he did is that I think I would be a pretty great lecturer. I think that because I already have I actually have I've given several lectures online. Already have an outline ready that I could give a lecture anytime. And it's one of those things where I would love to tour around the country and do all of that, but it's one of the things where you have to have the notoriety to be invited, and I unfortunately do not. But I think I'm fully capable of it. Whereas you have other writers who, because of their fame, they'll be invited to things, but they don't actually have the ability to actually speak on their process, and therefore they have the fame, but they don't have the tools to actually do it. Dickens is one of the few writers that actually had both.
Yeah, and apparently he would read his work out loud because if I remember correctly, he wanted to be an actor before he
Yeah,
started
he did.
writing, and
Yeah, he did originally.
he was always very, I don't know, is careful. I'll use careful. I think careful is a good word, but he always tried
Hmm.
to make the stories very musical in a sense, to where he could read it out loud and people would be like, ah, yes,
Yeah.
this guy knows what he's
Hmm.
doing.
Hmm. Well, one of the common misconceptions about me, though, is that, okay, well, you don't write it because, yes, I borrow from Dickens, but I also borrow from Shakespeare, Hawthorne, Melville. I don't know if you've read a lot of Melville. Melville is probably the most complex,
You
um,
know what's funny?
prose.
I'm sorry, I'll let you finish your thought, and I'll let you know what I think of Moby Dick.
Yeah. Well, I actually went to Mel. This is an interesting story. I really love to tell this story. Is that I actually went to Melville's house recently,
Mm.
back in October in Pittsfield. I actually toured his house. I toured Nathaniel Hawthorne's bedroom, he had his own bedroom, that he stayed when he was with Melville. And and it was really a transcendent experience. I loved it, but it was kind of complicated by the fact that I remember talking to the girl in the gift shop, and I told her that I was a writer and all of that, and she actually wanted, and this was not my idea, it was her idea to actually have my books in the gift shop in the Inspired by Melvins. It was her idea. She wanted to do that. Um,
Hmm.
but it didn't quite work out because she told me, because I thought, okay, this isn't going to work. But then I thought, well, maybe because she works here, she knows something that I don't about how this process and how it works. But she gave me her name and told me to email the managers of the shop or whatever. But then, of course, they shot the whole thing down because it was like, well, that's books in that. They gave me the typical kind of corporate answer, like, well, books in that section don't sell anymore. We're not looking to add that sort of thing. Um, and the thing is, though, is that I could tell though that there was definitely a conflict between how the staff felt and the conservative views of the management, and there
Mm-hmm.
was definitely a conflict there. And to me, it's like one of the reasons why I love and read classic literature is not to just keep it in place. It is to take what I've learned and apply it to new literature to comment on the now. And the
Mm-hmm.
problem is that I think people who are interested in classic literature, if it becomes too much of just curation, then you're not carrying on a legacy. You're guarding a tomb. You're not
Mm.
actually moving forward. And I think that can happen if you become so boggled down with the canon that you never actually try to read anything else or write anything else. And I think that was the problem with the Moby Dick museum, even though I loved it. I'll also say very briefly, though, that I went later to Nathaniel Hawthorne's grave
Mm.
in in Massachusetts and in Concord, Massachusetts. And I sat and I wrote by his grave. That graveyard is a very famous literary graveyard. Ralph Waldo Emerson is also buried there. Henry David Thoreau is buried there.
Mm-hmm.
The author who wrote Little Women is buried there. And so a lot of famous writers are buried there. And I sat and I wrote by his grave. I couldn't tour his houses, unfortunately, in Concord because it was during the government shutdown, and
Oh
so
yeah.
so they weren't open. I went on the outside. I saw where a fan was blowing inside. I saw, but I I sat on the steps and wrote there. Unfortunately, I didn't quite make it to Salem, because and the reason was that this was this was a family vacation, so I couldn't. I did go to Salem when I was 11, so I have been there, but it's been a really long time. Um, but the thing is that it was because it was Halloween season. It was really crowded in Salem,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, you
Yeah.
know, you know, and so you have people who are there not for the literary history. They're there because Salem and witches and all of that. You know, it's ironic because the Puritans there would be horrified by all of that if they were alive now. And
Witchcraft,
so
Yeah.
yeah, but it was a literary pilgrimage. I also went later to Maine, I think Kennebunk, Maine, and I looked out at the ocean in which my book takes place. The one I'm writing now, this one does too, but it takes place by the because I love the sea. To me, there's something so poetic about the sea, especially northern Atlantic seas more than
Mm.
tropical seas. And of course, I'm from Kentucky, so I don't get to see the sea here. So whenever I get a chance to go to the sea, I always try to write by it because I love the sea because I think it's just a highly poetic atmosphere to me.
Yeah, that's yeah. I've always wanted to go to Massachusetts because there's so much history there. But what's funny about Moby Dick? Just recently, some people I'm friends with they run a channel called Talking Story. They're named the Mittens, John, Amy,
Hmm.
and Jacob. Well, Jacob, who's the son, just started reading Moby Dick recently because his mom prodded him into it.
Hmm.
Um, and I was flabbergasted when he came on the show and was like, "Oh yeah, Moby Dick's a riot." I'm having a great time with it. I'm just sitting there. I'm like, I've read this fucker 3 times. I don't get it. I still don't get it. Yeah. So there you go.
You don't get Moby Dick?
Moby Dick's hard for me because it's like I should like it. It's a weird biblical adventure slash character study slash obsession piece, but I don't know. There's a lot of I don't know. It's so I want to read it again at some point to see if it finally like clicks for me. But it's
Well, I can understand that to a degree in the sense that it is a highly what you might call it's a highly masculine kind of story.
Yeah.
it's an adventure story, and I tend to Moby Dick is a little unique because I tend to prefer books that I'm highly interested, for example, in female characters, in female psychology and all of
Mm-hmm.
that, because to me I just think there's something. Most of my main characters are female, um, because I think there's something so poetic and sensual about female nature that I'm just more drawn to that. And so sometimes
Mm-hmm.
story, and then yeah, and so sometimes story, and that's one of the things I think is lacking on BookTube is more serious female voices. You don't really see a lot of them.
It's a good point.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, like most of BookTube is surrounded by essentially what you might call the mano literature. You either have what you might call the romance authors on the one hand who are mostly female, then you have the kind of manosphere literary crowd on the other.
Who
But
do
I don't
like
really
who
see,
show like Stoic philosophy?
yeah, but you don't really see it. Like most of my audience is like 75%, I think, male. But I would definitely love to have more to interact with more female voices. But anyway, I love again, female character psychology. But the reason why I like Moby Dick, even though it doesn't have any of that, um, is the fact that it's not really about whale hunting. What it's really about is burning desire, obsession, desiring something to the point that it destroys you. Captain Ahab talks about the idea of everyone, including the whale, being pasteboard masks. What he's actually saying there is that it's not about the whale. The whale is just the vessel. What it's really about is this struggle to defy exist existence itself. This idea that fate can control me and I can't control my own fate. So he's really warring with fate itself, not the whale. And once you understand that complex psychology, it will become a lot more interesting than if you just see it as just a whale hunt.
Well, I don't know. I remember reading. Did you ever? Do you know what the like illustrated classics are? Like like have you ever heard of
Um,
anything like that?
I know that there are abridged classics that are ill. I'm not familiar with that specifically.
I did remember reading the Moby Dick one, and I was just kind of like oddly fascinated with it because like they would have
Hmm.
little illustrations. Like there's the one scene where the dude is like literally strapped to the whale,
Hmm.
and you're like, what the fuck is that? And then there's that
Yeah.
scene where that same guy is like, hey Ahab, I just had a dream the other night. We should abandon this quest. This is a horrible idea. And Ahab's
Yeah.
like, no, you fool, we're gonna take it down. And
Yeah.
and I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, cool. And then I like read it years later. I'm like, what the fuck is this? You know?
Well, sometimes how we read things as children, like I used to read a lot of abridged stories as children, but then found that it's far more complex than what we read as children. But the thing is, what I love about Melville though is that Melville, I think, he is probably, I think, the best writer of maximalist prose there is. There's other than people who are like formerly poets, but when you combine the poetry and the philosophy of Melville, I think he's quite spectacular. But you have to be patient with Melville. He's not an easy read. You have to give yourself to the text, and some people struggle to do that.
Yeah, that's sometimes hard for me. I was talking with a friend of mine the other day about Thomas Pynchon because I'm just like, I've read Pynchon, I've read like Inherent Vice and Vineland. I don't know, I'm struggling with it. And he just goes, just give yourself to the text, young grasshopper. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, what does that
Yeah,
mean? It's a similar thing. I don't
yeah,
know if I can do that though. That's the thing.
yeah. Well, it essentially
Or at least
means
I
just
can, but it's like a particular book, like I'll read like a
yeah,
Blood Meridian, which oddly enough is kind of inspired. I know like Moby Dick was one of Cormac McCarthy's favorite books, but it's
yeah.
such a weird thing. Like I don't know. I guess it just depends on how it's written.
Well,
I don't know.
it depends on if you view language as an experience in itself, or you view it as just utility, at least partially anyway, to move the story along. And if you view it as that, some people go in with the wrong approach there. Is that I try One of the things I try to do is that because I will admit that there are some passages in classic literature that I do not understand what they mean. It's not I do not understand everything, but the thing is that I try to live with being uncomfortable there because I know that will unlock greater insights, both philosophical and aesthetic, if I just let the language wash over me, and because I am highly attuned with language myself because I write it, and therefore for me, it's the most natural thing in the world to become embodied within the and become one with the text because I live in language, every day when I write, and so it's quite easy for me to do that. But if you go in with a utilitarian approach where it's like, what happens next, what happens here, then it can be quite difficult if you go in with that approach.
Yeah, it's really funny. I had a teacher in college who was talking about American classics, and we were like, "Oh, what's the one that like you were just kind of let down with?" And he just goes, "Moby Dick," and he goes on this like 5 minute tirade about it. Just goes on and on about fucking whaling, and
Yeah,
I'm like, yeah, this guy, it was fun. Like, the guy was on it, man. I mean, I don't know if
yeah,
I
well,
agreed with him on that. I mean, yeah, the
yeah,
meandering with the whales was really strange, but again, I
yeah,
thought
well,
The thing that kind of weirded me out with Moby Dick was just like it's such a weird book. Like
hmm
I don't know how to describe it.
well. That's because Melville isn't engaging with just pure poetry alone. He makes almost mysticism out of poetry, where the things that you see
Yeah,
around
and
you are
I should
almost
like that. That's a weird
supernatural.
thing. Like,
You know, yeah, the things that are around you are almost supernatural. But but yeah, well, the middle parts about going like it can seem like the middle parts are definitely the most difficult when it comes to information about the whale because then it's like, okay, well, why am you might say, okay, why am I reading a textbook? And that's one of the reasons why the book didn't do very well originally in the late 19th century because people didn't know what they were looking at. But the
yeah,
thing is that
and there was also like this
yeah,
odd like homoerotic element, which by the way, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with like homoerotic elements in books, but like it was just kind of like what is this just subtext? Is like Herman Melville working through something? Like I don't know. Like, I don't know.
I don't really
Again, I
get
want to
that,
read it
and
again.
yeah,
I want to read it again at some point.
I don't really get that in Moby Dick. I get that in Billy Budd. If you've read Billy Budd,
Yeah,
um,
I
wi-
read Billy Budd a long time. I remember liking
yeah,
that one a lot more. I thought it was a bit more concise.
yeah, it was short, and novella.
Well,
Um,
yeah.
but the thing is that yeah, there's this whole thing where this guy is like some homoeroticism there, where a guy is obsessed with Billy Budd and one of the sailors, and then but then he kind of hates himself for it, and then so Billy Budd ends up punching him and he kills him, and then Billy Budd is unfortunately executed, hanged. But no, but the thing is with Moby Dick though is that I believe the whaling parts, even though they're not the most exciting parts, they do give you context about whaling, the kind of world that he lived in, and 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 it's one of those things even though they're not the most exciting part, they do give you context about the world that Melville lived in because it's more than just a story. It's part biography, it's part novel, it's part poetry. It's everything that Melville actually did and cared about combined. And so you have to keep that in mind while reading it.
Fair enough. I mean, and the thing is, like, I read a lot of classics growing up. Like, I read like Tom Sawyer, and like there was a time in the like seventh or eighth grade where I was reading a bunch of classics because I didn't want to go through that high school experience where you read it and you're like, this sucks. And there was a couple of them that were really good. Like, I really like Heart of Darkness, and
Yeah,
The
well, I love Heart of Darkness.
Great Gatsby's my favorite book of all time. So I mean,
Well, you'll be interested then because the my book Silent Reckoning,
mm,
which I don't have with me, is essentially The Great Gatsby, inspired by The Great Gatsby. If you've
oh, oh,
it's the book I wrote. It's the book I wrote before The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, and the covers over there. You can look it up later. But the thing is that there's two eyes on the cover, but essentially it's about the actress, silent film actress in 1929 living in New York, Jeannie Anderson, that she's worried about her career fading, and
so kind of like
she has a
Sunset Boulevard a little bit.
yeah, a little more also All About Eve as well,
Mm.
where you have the character of Walter Peterson who is a fan of hers, and he's trying to essentially revitalize her career, and so they engage in a plan to essentially ruin the career of this rival actress who they know is an alcoholic by essentially psychologically manipulating her to ruin her career with alcoholism. And there's a deal made with this critic named Rupert Miller,
Mm.
who was originally a critic of Jeannie Anderson. He was originally a critic, but But Walter Peterson makes a deal with him. Well, if you ruin Ursula Chapman's career, or if you bring her me scandalous photos, then I will help revitalize Jeannie Anderson's career. But there's a twist there, because his identity turns out to be someone you don't expect, because there's also passages from the past, flashback passages, which have to do with Jeannie's childhood, about how she had an abusive mother, an abusive almost stepfather. And it's interesting because the book is actually written in both first person and third person, and it goes between them, because I was actually uncomfortable with first person at the time, but I decided to experiment with it a little in Silent Reckoning, which then gave me the courage to write the ecstasy and the ignominy entirely in first person. But Silent Reckoning is essentially a tragedy about a fall of an actress, about what it means to be, about what it means for your beauty and talent to fade, and all of that. And so, and it's written in a style quite similar to The Great Gatsby.
Oh well, I'm down for that. I'll have to add that because I really like that's well, it's my favorite book. So there you go.
Yeah.
Um, um, yeah, there's a real I mean, I don't want to nerd out about Great Gatsby too much, but like there's a real delicacy with the language where I remember when I read it when I was like 14 years old, and I was like, I want to write something like that at some point in my
Hmm.
life. I don't know if I ever will. I don't know if I'm as good of a writer as F. Scott Fitzgerald was. I still need to read his other
Yeah.
books because I've read like a lot of his short stories, and I've read
Hmm.
The Great Gatsby. I haven't read any of his other novels.
I read one book called This Side of Paradise,
That was his
which
first
was
one,
his
wasn't it?
first book. Eh, Yeah, I didn't like it all that much, actually, because it seemed to me like it was too autobiographical. That it was essentially a bunch of college kids going around playing and having, affairs and all of that. And I'm just thinking that
Oh,
this is essentially just Fitzgerald's college life. It's
yeah.
just his college life.
It sounds like a John Updike or a Philip Roth novel. I'm like,
Yeah,
I don't want to read that.
yeah, yeah. And the thing is, it's like I there was no real conflict. It was just like, this girl rejected me. Now this girl rejected me. I can't seem to, and it was just, there was a lot of angst involved, and it seemed way too autobiographical for my taste. And so, no, I mean, it was an okay book overall, but it's no Great Gatsby.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, like the Beats, like a lot of it is like thinly veiled autobiography, which I thought was a really interesting literary style when I was a teenager, but I've kind of grown past that because I like stories that kind of take me out of my experience more now
Yeah.
than,
Hmm.
which is why I'm
I
more
tend to,
interested in like William Burroughs because William Burroughs did some really interesting like stylistic experimentations as he kind of went on in the ways that people like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg never did. So that really
yeah,
interests me.
yeah, yeah. I haven't read William Burroughs, so I couldn't really say there. Um, but
I know you didn't you say
the
you didn't like the beats in your canon authors you didn't like as well, or am I mistaken on
no,
that?
no, I didn't say that.
Oh,
I said I didn't like Hemingway, um, Twain, and H.G. Wells. Um,
didn't like it. That's another because the Time Machine's one of my favorite books. I love the Time Machine. I
yeah.
actually just reread it
Well,
last year for a class, and it was
yeah.
I love that
Well,
book. Maybe it's
yeah.
just because I read it
Well,
when I was a kid and I
well,
loved it. But
not like is a strong word. It's mainly more that I like a lot of science fiction concepts. Like, I just found, and I love the Time Machine, the movie too, actually. But the thing is that I find a lot of science fiction writing to be, I don't find the prose to be very skillful, and I find some of the times the philosophy to be lacking. It's not so much saying that H.G. Wells was a bad writer. It was just more that I found him, and a lot I find him and a lot of science fiction writers lacking.
well,
That's
yeah, a
all I'm
lot of it
really
is
saying.
very like concept driven, so that kind of I mean,
Yeah.
there's some I really like. Ray Bradbury is one of my favorite writers. Philip K.
Yes.
Dick is one I really like quite a bit. He's an interesting. I don't think you would be particularly impressed with his writing style, but I think just a lot of the stuff he wrestled with is still
Yeah.
we're still trying to figure out what the hell he was going on about even
Yeah.
now. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, Bradbury, I think was just I think he was just came off like a nice guy. You know, I
Yeah.
like when when I listen to Bradbury, I just think that I can't really speak to his writing ability, but when it comes to like his philosophy on writing and him speaking about the joy of writing, I very pleasant fellow Ray Bradbury. I think he would have been pleasant to talk to.
I actually had a friend who met him and actually got one of his books. I think it was the Martian Chronicles signed by him, which was really awesome. I was like,
Yeah.
damn, that's cool. But yeah, no,
Yep.
it was that was another. That kind of makes me think of another thing you said. You said like a lot. You felt like a lot of science fiction writers are like very philosophically simple, and I was curious, like to kind of poke you a little bit on that because
Well,
there's some of
there was
them I think are quite fascinating. Now, if you're talking like Asimov, I would
uh,
probably agree with you, or even like Arthur
yeah,
C. Clarke.
Asimov. Yeah, Asimov. I think it was Asimov who I saw. I can't remember if it was Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke. It was maybe Asimov. I can't remember. It was the who I saw an interview with where he was talking about the fact that well, some things are just morally right and wrong, and we should know it. And there's nothing, and when some things are just a given, and blah 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 blah. And I'm thinking, yeah, yeah. Regardless of where you land philosophically on that, it's much more complex than just, oh, I feel this is right or wrong, therefore it is. It's much more complex than that. And I just found him in that interview to be really philosophically just naive. I found that but I will say and admit that science fiction is probably the genre I have read the least, and so I can't really speak to its quality as a whole. I would definitely like to write a science fiction novel someday that is perhaps more philosophical in its approach when I have time. But I will say it is the genre that I am probably the least informed about.
Fair enough. I didn't want to like go like, oh, you're wrong, but I did kind of want to poke you a little bit about that because I thought that was interesting when you
Yeah,
said that. I wanted to see what you meant by that.
yeah.
But I also like Twain. I feel like Twain's one of the like. It was funny what you said about Twain that you think he was much like cleverer than he actually was. I actually feel the opposite when I read his work.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh boy, if you think Twain is fucking pissed off, don't read Ambrose Bierce. Like Ambrose
Yeah,
Bierce is even worse.
yeah. Well, I just find that there's a condescension to Twain
They
that
didn't they
actually
didn't
isn't
call
backed
him
up.
bitter Bierce for no reason. I'll just say
Yeah,
that.
I find that there's a condescension to Twain that actually isn't backed up from what I've seen by his actual talent. and
That's
um
interesting.
and the yeah, and the thing is that because I think if you look at someone like Faulkner, I think he wrote, for example, regional dialect far better, far more poetically and philosophically than Twain did. And so I just find, and I've been I to Springfield. I've been to Illinois and a lot of the places that where Twain was, and I was turned off to him when he tried to basically write a hit piece on Shakespeare, which he essentially did. And Shakespeare being my favorite writer, I'm going to have some problems with that. The idea,
Yeah,
this
he was one
arrogance
of
that
the
he,
people who like thought Shakespeare wasn't Shakespeare, right?
yeah, essentially. And it's very kind of ironic because Twain came from a humble background himself, and yet he's trying to claim that Shakespeare couldn't have written Shakespeare, which has no. It's interesting from a romantic perspective. In fact, I'll just tell you a story. I actually was involved in a contest, like I don't know, almost a decade ago now, where I actually was a membership, and some people might be from the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, the company that doesn't believe that I was a member of one of their members for a year, and that might surprise you. But the
You
reason
didn't
was
think
is
Shakespeare
because
was Shakespeare?
no, well, they didn't think that Shakespeare wrote his work, that it was written by someone else, that it was written by the Earl of
Wait, so
Oxford.
did you also believe that it's at one point, or was it just kind of
Um,
you joined him because it was fun or something like that?
yeah, well, it's complicated because there was a time where I wasn't sure. I didn't like firmly believe it, but there was a time where there was a contest in order to make a video that they were hosting about why Shakespeare did. And I thought, well, that'd be fun. Might get some money. I don't know. I'm not sure if I really believe this. And therefore, I made a video about it and not really even strongly. And I came in as a finalist, even though I didn't. I came in as a finalist. I'm like, I don't really even firmly believe this, but the finalist. Um, But the thing is though that since then though I've read more and become more philosophically serious and realized that even though it is an interesting romantic theory, the idea that he didn't write it, I mean, I don't think there's actually any historical or academic basis for it. When it comes to my experience, when it comes to how people actually become great writers, um, it's far more about natural talent and ability. And I also think that Shakespeare came from a background where he lived in the country, grew up in the country like I do, where he grew up with the kind of poetic sensibility about nature that I think you need to have, and so for that reason, I am for the most part convinced that Shakespeare did write his plays now. But I just thought there was an arrogance and a presumption when Twain tried to
That's
debunk
interesting.
that.
I generally find like kind of the like if you read like something like Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer, I kind of find it's the opposite. I think they're I mean the dialect is definitely like you have to kind of used to it, but I think that there's a real lack of pretension in a lot of his work, which
Well,
is, I
well,
think is interesting. So
First
I
of
thought
all,
I found it was interesting you said that. I guess I should say.
yeah. Well, it depends. Well, there's Twain the man and there's Twain the work. It's not exactly the same. Um, and the thing I was talking more about his pretension in terms of his quotes
Oh,
and his writings other places. When it comes to the actual things like Tom
not
Sawyer
not not a
itself,
fan of his aphorisms.
yeah, no, no. When it comes to Tom Sawyer itself, I would say that my main problem is that I find it to be rather light compared to something like William Faulkner, which I think is far more complex. And so
That's
that's my
fair.
only point
Yeah,
there.
that's fair. Okay. I mean,
Hmm.
I've not read a lot of. I've read some of Faulkner's short stories, like A Rose for Emily. That was a weird one to read in middle school.
Have you read As I Lay Dying?
It was interesting. I was talking with Brian from Bookish a few actually this was like a month ago about like Shakespeare or not Shakespeare. I was talking about like Faulkner to start out with. I think I started either with Light in August or As I Lay Dying. I started reading it and then I put it down and then I forgot to turn it back to my library and I had to pay a fine. That wasn't fun. But aside from that, but I don't know where to start with Faulkner. He's one I want to try though.
Yeah, well, I would start there, not The Sound and the Fury, because The
Oh,
Sound and the
definitely not
Fury,
starting there.
yeah, it's more complex. There's a lot of stream of consciousness in it.
Yeah, I
Um,
sometimes struggle with stream of consciousness.
Yeah. Well, the thing is about Azalai Dang is it's a simple story about a family that try to take their mother wanted to be buried somewhere else. Therefore, they go on a journey to take their mother there to bury her. But there's this one scene where they end up losing her and the body falls out of the boat down the stream
Oh
and they have to
no.
catch the and they have to go in to catch the body and some of them nearly drown. And I think there's also some kind of storyline about a one of the daughters who is pregnant and she tries to attain this drug to get a secret abortion or something like that. And so it's a the thing is with Faulkner is that I'm far more interested in the way his prose and the way he uses language than the plots per se.
Mm.
Um, and I do think that if I do think that Faulkner was, I think, probably, in my estimation, the greatest writer of the 20th century, not of all time, not really even the greatest American writer. That might be Melville or Hawthorne or someone like that, but definitely I think Faulkner was the greatest writer of the 20th century, and he gave legitimacy to writing being done in the South. And as someone who is from Kentucky, and of course Kentucky isn't like the deep South; it's kind of a mixture of Midwest and South.
Yeah, kind of like
But
Oklahoma, honestly. Yeah,
yeah,
that's where I'm
because
from.
but I can yeah, but if but if I lived, let's say, 100 years ago, I'd probably it would probably look something like Faulkner's world, and so you know, and so I can kind of relate to Faulkner on that level. Well, Kentucky's an odd place because it's one of the things where it's not southern enough, where the Southerners were kind of reject you're not southern enough, but then the Northerners say, well, or the Midwest people, you're not really a part of us either. So Kentucky is kind of like in
Yeah.
this odd limbo.
It's fun. That's funny you say that because I'm kind of I'm from Oklahoma, so we're kind of this like forgotten kind of bastard state over here that like we don't really know
Hmm.
what to call ourselves
Well, the thing
aside from
about growing,
Native American land.
yeah, well, the thing about growing up in rural Kentucky though is because, and I am I mean, to give you an explanation, I live about 40 minutes. I'm about 80 miles south of Louisville,
Hmm.
where where non-locals call it Louisville, locals call it Louisville. But anyway, and then about 100 miles north of Nashville, kind of in between. Um, and it's and I live on 100 acres of land
Huh.
with my family, and my parents are my father is a retired art teacher,
Hmm.
and my they took my mother's a retired teacher and everything, and my sister lives here as well. But the thing is, it's beautiful land to ride on. I often love going out in nature and riding when I can, when it's not too hot, but it's also can be somewhat isolating because I am not close to any kind of urban or literary hub where I can actually engage with people or talk to people physically about these things. So one of the reasons why I put so many ideas online is because I that's kind of missing in my physical world. I don't really have any of that, which can kind of be isolating at times.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, that's kind of why a lot of people start book too, because they're just kind of like, well, I don't know who else is reading. Let's see what's out there in the ether, if you will.
Hmm.
But excuse me. Um, I also like Shakespeare a lot too. He's great.
Oh
I
yeah.
actually have my complete works of Shakespeare back there. I don't want to pull it out though at the moment. But
Yeah, there's this one channel that I follow a lot called Shakespeare Made Clear with Sarah Spring, and
mm,
I think that she's absolutely fantastic. I think Sarah is so incredibly talented, and she and I have we've become friends over the months, and it's just I am a consistent supporter of hers because she's a Shakespearean actress and she talks about Shakespeare, but I think she's great. She's fantastic.
yeah, no, I. It's funny you made a video about Richard III because Richard III is probably my personal favorite of his work.
Hmm.
You know
Yeah, well,
that isn't Macbeth. It always it's kind of a shift. It's kind of a shift between Richard III um and Macbeth. I one of actually I shouldn't probably say this, but one of my ambitions in life is to kind of do my kind of to write about Richard III because the actual figure is really fascinating as well. He wasn't like what Shakespeare wrote. A lot of what Shakespeare wrote was kind of him mixing up history and stuff. Like I had
hmm.
someone who compared him to James Cameron, which I think is actually a pretty good comparison, honestly, because he was an
Oh,
entertainer.
wow, that sounds like an insult to me, but
But you know,
um, but no, I'm not really a huge fan of James Cameron, but I'll get that into a second. But the thing is though is that
well, in the sense
what
that
I
he was
love,
like a popular, like kind of,
yeah,
you know, trying he was trying to he was entertaining the masses, you know. So this idea that it's kind of
yeah,
stuffy nowadays, if you know like where
yeah,
Shakespeare came from and what he was writing, it's kind of laughable.
yeah. Well, he was doing both. Like he was entertaining the groundlings, and he was also entertaining the intelligentsia, and he managed to do both at the same time. But one of the reasons why I love Richard III, though, is because you remember the scene where Richard III tries to seduce Lady Anne?
Yeah, uh huh.
Um, I love that scene because it's essentially like you read it and she's entirely against him at the beginning because he killed her husband, but then he uses poetry as a weapon essentially to seduce her and
Mm-hmm.
beguile her and until she's essentially on his side at the end. And I am so fascinated with poetry's ability to seduce and to beguile and how aesthetic power can just completely overwhelm a person um to the point where they are willing, in some cases, to change their moral principles entirely. Because it's what I think it's very Nietzschean in that sense that there's kind of a Nietzschean hierarchy where poetry can be sensual and seductive enough to where you will choose poetic power over weak sentimentality. And I'm so fascinated by that concept. And in fact, in my both the ecstasy and the ignominy, the character of Desmond Archer is somewhat like Richard III in the sense that he is a violent revolutionary type, and how he seduces his landlady, whose husband he killed, And he,
It's a
yeah,
lot of there's a
and,
lot of seduction and affairs in your stuff from the sounds of
yes,
it.
exactly, like Shakespeare himself. But
And
but
murder.
essentially he seduces his landlady. Yeah, yeah. Well, he essentially seduces his landlady into who hates him at first, but he seduces her with overwhelming poetic power. It's not meant to be tender. It's not meant to be sweet. It's meant to he's verbose for a reason, where he seduces her with overwhelming poetic power, where her senses just ultimately submit to his aesthetic strength, and she entirely gives into him. And then she starts to view her husband as pathetic and weak in a way she didn't before. But then, of course, he does away with her as well, because she's
Hmm.
just a means she's just a means to an end to him. And so, but
That's
I took that
that makes
relation
it
I took that relationship directly from Richard III's relationship with Lady Anne.
that's interesting because you didn't really care much for like Blood Meridian. Because I find the Judge is kind of a similar character where he uses this like vast, vocabulary and what's the other what's another word
Well,
I'm looking for? He
the
uses this vast
yeah,
vocabulary and knowledge to not
er,
only like kind of take
loquacious,
people down,
erudite,
basically trying to like or
Um,
he intimidates people with his mass knowledge, but he also seduces people as well.
yes,
So it's interesting
I
he didn't
actually
take
thought
to it
that.
as much.
Well, I actually think the Judge is probably the one great thing about Blood Meridian. I actually did
Okay.
get a lot about, and Desmond actually is the Judge was one of those inspirations actually.
Really?
Um,
Okay.
and so yes, and so I didn't like Blood Meridian as a whole, but I thought the Judge was definitely the strongest point there. What I found lacking in it was essentially some of the prose, and also I found that a lot of the characters, you really it seemed like the story just moved through events, and you couldn't really emotionally sympathize. So when the Judge did prey on people, which I thought he was really good at, you didn't really care, and because you
Mm.
didn't care about the people because you didn't care about the people he was preying on to care,
Yeah,
and so that was my problem with
I
it.
hate to sound hypocritical here because I was kind of talking earlier about I kind of sometimes struggle with giving yourself to the work, but I find Blood Meridian is one of those books where you kind of have to give yourself to it. It's like
Yeah.
I had a friend of mine who described it as kind of like an epic poem, and I think that's a
Hmm.
good way to describe it. Honestly, I mean, I'm not saying it's like Paradise Lost or anything, but it's
Well, my books are essentially kind of like epic poems. I
mm,
mean, my books are essentially like they're essentially poems for the most part written in prose. And so a lot of people, if you're aware, if all you view writing is just plain ordinary prose, you're going to be disappointed um by my work, because my work is essentially poetry in prose form. Because the reason why I write the reason why I write in prose instead of strict poetry is because it allows more freedom than if you're trying to write in rhyme and meter and all of that.
mm-hmm.
Um, but my books are essentially prose poems. But back to Blood Meridian. No, to me it wasn't the I didn't struggle with the language. I understood it. I just didn't agree with what it was trying to do philosophically, which is different.
Well, yeah, and also it's like what you said earlier. It's more of a study. It's not necessarily a narrative where you're supposed to like empathize with the character. It's about like the themes and the ideas, which
Yeah,
that definitely turns people off. And I totally get why people don't like Blood Meridian. That's fine. I'm not
yeah,
saying you have to like it, but it's definitely it's an experience for sure.
yeah,
But I
yeah,
just thought it was interesting that you said that because like I felt that's one of the things that's really frightening to me about that book is like how easily the judge is able to seduce people with his mass iridation while
yeah.
being just the worst kind of monster
Yeah,
imaginable.
exactly. But again, I like that part of it. It was just that I found you didn't care enough about the characters being seduced to actually for it to actually hold any weight. But I understood what he was trying to do. I am not saying, by the way, that Blood Meridian is a bad book. I think
No,
it's a
I
good book, actually. It's just not as good as I thought it was going to be. That's all I'm saying.
that's fair. Yeah. No, I
Yeah,
just thought that was interesting though cuz
yeah,
but yeah, that's a good point about Richard III as well. Um
yeah.
and like a lot of people say he's like comically evil and I'm like, well, I think there's a lot of like I think there's a lot of subtext in the play as well that people don't really notice. And it was really a
Hmm.
teacher that explained it to me and kind of clicked for me, I guess, which is always nice.
Well, the thing is about Richard III is that, unlike a lot of villains, is that he doesn't pretend not to be evil. You know exactly what he's doing. But the thing is about some authoritarians take the approach that they try to hide their evil and put up a facade of virtue. What Richard does is that he says, I'm so charismatically evil that you, with your virtue, are going to be drawn to me because you feel you have the same corruption in you that you wear on the inside that I have on the outside. And that I think is the point of Richard III's character.
Yeah, that's interesting. Or but yeah, like I said, with Shakespeare, I kind of go back and forth really between that and Macbeth because like Macbeth is a weird one because again, I one of the reasons I love like Blood Meridian, for instance, is like there's this sense in the story, even though it's ostensibly real, like it's ostensibly
Hmm.
set in the real world, and from what I recall, much of what happened in the novel, like with the Glant gang, who was a real gang, by the way, most of it actually happened, and McCarthy was very careful to get much of that history right. But there is that sense that there's something otherworldly going on. Heart of Darkness has a similar kind of, which is why I like Heart of Darkness, and even Great Gatsby to a lesser extent. Um, but Macbeth does this very well too. That there is this otherworldliness to what's going on, even though it ostensibly takes place in the real world.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know how
essentially
to
with
really describe it, but I like that sensation.
yeah, well, in my book, The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, there's actually a witch character, which is really kind of surprising because the book is mostly naturalistic.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a witch character in chapter 2. She comes back in chapter 28 that she essentially gives prophecies about what's going to happen, and later it turns out that she's the mother of Desmond Archer. So there's almost a supernatural quality to Desmond himself being this the son of a witch. But no, I love Macbeth because of that ethereal quality that it has. Because Macbeth was actually probably one of the first Shakespeare plays that I fell in love with because I think the language in some ways is more accessible than some of Shakespeare's other plays.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more compact, and because of its short duration, Macbeth is typically the play that I recommend people watch if they haven't seen a lot of Shakespeare yet. In fact, I'm actually going to be seeing my first ever Shakespeare play
Oh,
live,
nice.
hopefully.
That's definitely
Yeah,
a bucket list thing for me to see an actual. Because it
yeah,
always people have said this on the internet, people have said this online, people have said this in books. Like Shakespeare, the problem with teaching Shakespeare, he's meant to be watched. He's not meant to be read.
yeah.
So
Well,
he's a great writer, but
yeah,
like you have like
my
but when
views,
you watch him though, you get kind of a
yeah, my views are kind of complex in this because there were quartos printed in his lifetime that people bought and that they were reading. And so technically he was meant to be read, I think, to a degree because you had those quartos being printed, for people to
mm-hmm.
buy. And the thing is that it's a different experience because when you read Shakespeare, the benefit of reading Shakespeare is that you can home in on a single line and sit with it
Mm-hmm.
and try to dissect the meaning. When an actor reads it, there's a lot of benefit. You get the words being made flesh, you get that intimacy, but you kind of can lose the analytical aspect in the moment. Whereas reading allows you, so it's a different experience. But I've seen a lot of Shakespeare film adaptations, but I've never seen a
Mm.
play simply because
I'm
because I've never seen a play live because in the rural area where I live, there isn't a lot of Shakespeare, and it's one of those things where a lot of the Shakespeare is like downtown in Louisville, and a lot of my family like, we can't go downtown because we'll be mugged because they're paranoid. I don't know what. I mean, it's stupid. It's stupid. It's silly, but it's silly.
That's
But
funny.
because yeah, but because I can't actually drive myself for various reasons, I'm dependent on them to get places. Um, and but this play is coming to a place nearer where I can actually go, and it's The Tempest. So
Oh, that's one
it's
of the
his
ones I
last
haven't
play.
read. Actually, I want to because I
Yeah,
want to read his fantastical plays. I just haven't gotten around to it yet.
yeah.
That was
Well,
one of his last ones, wasn't it?
it was the last one that he wrote alone. He wrote some collaborative works after that, but I'm currently in the middle of reading it to prepare,
Mm.
and so And so, but it's essentially about Prospero, this wizard, and It's kind of somewhat based on colonialism and this island. I'm in the middle of reading it right now, but hopefully I will understand it more by the time I go see the play, which I think is on May 22nd, I believe.
I mean, I guess my favorite Shakespeare plays are the ones where like people are manipulating everyone, like like Richard
Yes,
III, Macbeth to an extent.
Othello.
Othello is great. But
Yeah.
I am curious, what's your favorite Shakespeare adaptation?
That's difficult. I like the Richard III with Laurence Olivier,
Mm-hmm.
from 1955. I also though like the 1948 Laurence Olivier Hamlet. I like
Mm,
that. There's also the 1952 or something 51 of Macbeth with Orson Welles,
mm,
and yeah, that one is really good because it's almost noirish in the in the
mm-hmm.
in the way that it's lit. It's essentially like Macbeth as a film noir, and I would actually recommend anyone who wants to see Shakespeare for the first. I would actually recommend they watch a Wells adaptation because Orson Welles is really good at adapting Shakespeare for the screen instead of it just being a filmed play.
Mm-hmm.
And so he combines depth of field and field and all of those things that and his Othello was also a really great adaptation. Even though I will admit that Wells himself as a romantic as a lead was only average. His acting ability there, but his directing abilities though were were quite powerful to the point
Mm.
where his films are definitely, I think, some of the best Shakespeare adaptations because he makes Shakespeare movies, not just filmed Shakespeare plays.
Yeah, I my favorite is Ron, which is the Kurosawa version of King Lear. It is awesome. I love that film. But if you're like that's more of like a remix because it's Japanese, but
That's more
um
inspirational, though. That's more inspirational than like a direct adaptation.
I love it though. But if you're talking like
Yeah,
straight adaptation, I
yeah,
do like a lot of the Kenneth Branagh stuff. Like I like his Othello that he did was a lot of fun. He's really good at Iago. Though I really
yeah,
like Bob Hoskins as Iago because I think Bob Hoskins did a really good
yeah.
job.
I haven't
Um
seen that actually. So
um the Macbeth film from like 2015 with Michael Fassbender. I really enjoyed that one. That's the only one I've seen, at least so far, that has like captured just how like that otherworldliness I was telling you about. It kind of feels like you're on another planet, which you
yeah,
might, you're probably more experienced on it than me because you've lived longer than I have. But
yeah.
um, that
Well,
one
the
I
thing,
really enjoyed that one a lot. And Michael Fassbender is
yeah,
very good at losing his shit, so there's
yeah.
that.
I haven't seen that adaptation actually either. I mean that I've been wanting to see it. I'm aware of its existence, but I haven't seen it. I am not a huge fan though of modern dress Shakespeare. I can't stand modern dress. Now, I am not saying modern dress the characters have to be dressed like Elizabethans, but if you basically put the person in a 21st century t-shirt, I'm not buying it. I am
Well,
not
the
buying it.
the the Macbeth movie I'm talking about does not have that. It is very like,
No.
but I get what you mean. I get what you mean. I
Yeah.
remember there was a
Yeah.
documentary I watched when I was in school of Patterson Joseph, who's done some
Yeah.
great work with Shakespeare. He basically did like a modern like Romeo and Juliet. Like if you see like the like that's the thing that threw me off the Baz Luhrmann Romeo and Juliet. It's like people are dressed
Yeah.
up in '90s gear, shouting Shakespeare dialogue incoherently at people, and you're just like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Stop
It's just a
that.
gimmick. It's
Yeah.
just a gimmick to me.
I have people
I'm
who
not a
really
huge
love that. I'm like, it's a fun movie, but it's I don't like it personally as a
well think
Shakespeare
well,
adaptation.
well think of this for example. Can you imagine David Copperfield in the 21st century?
Oh,
Because if he's David's running around with his phone, or
got
Tale
the
of Two Cities in the
Riz,
20th.
David.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about, Charles Dickens as David
Yeah,
Copperfield,
no, I know, I know.
yeah, 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 I mean, that's just, it just doesn't work because one of the reasons why I write period pieces, yes, it's the language matters, but it's also the look, the costuming, that's part of the atmosphere. You take half of that away and it's incoherent to me. It's like, I think they do it is because they're trying to say something relevant by dressing people up. But the thing is that but it's not risk averse because it's like, okay, we're still doing Shakespeare, come see it, but now we're doing so. But if you wanted to do something different, you'd write a new play. You wouldn't try to impose modern standards on Shakespeare.
Yeah, no, it's a um yeah, no, it's weird. I agree with you. It's I mean, I'm not saying everyone, like you said, I'm not saying everyone should like dress up like Elizabethans or anything. It's a similar thing.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen the Patrick Stewart Macbeth where it's like in like this
Yes.
weird like Eastern Europe kind of, and they have like
Yeah.
AK-47. It just felt weird to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And
I like that. Yeah. I actually thought I didn't
but
mind
you
that
you
so
like
much.
that? Okay.
I wouldn't. Yeah. Well, I mean,
I mean, it's not as
well,
obnoxious
I
as the Baz Luhrmann one where Jamie
no.
Kennedy is
Well,
yelling, "Do
there.
I bite my thumb at you?" And you're like, "Dude, stop, chill the fuck out."
Yeah.
This,
There's a difference. There's a difference between liking a modern dress adaptation, um, be be sometimes they work in spite of modern dress, but not because of it. There's a difference there.
okay.
Yeah, and like for example, I really like the Richard III, the Ian McKellen one from the
Oh
'90s,
yeah, they're all
where
like Nazis. Yeah,
you
that's
know,
a fun one. That's an
yeah, that
interesting
takes
one.
place in the '30s. But it's not the modern dress that sells it for me. It's the fact that Ian McKellen is doing Shakespeare.
Well, yeah,
And so to me, it's like I think a modern dress can be good, but it's good in spite of it, not because of it.
yeah. No, that's a good point. I'm one of those people who's like so neurotic. I get really distracted by that stuff. So I mean, there you go.
Yeah.
But I see what you mean. I mean, it was funny. I was talking with another friend of mine the other day about um Patrick Stewart because I was thinking about getting his autobiography because that actually seems like a really good book. But I was like, I think he's one of those like Shakespearean actors who just gets it, and like there's a lot of them that like
Hmm.
don't. And that kind of brings me where I land on the whole Shakespeare authorship date. I kind of fall where like David Tennant did. It's like, look, it doesn't really matter who wrote it. What matters is what he wrote, and it's great. So
Yeah.
even though
Well, I think it
I
actually.
fall under the line that yeah, I think Shakespeare did it because there's the evidence
Yeah.
suggests that he did. So there you go.
Yeah, I think it does matter to a degree. That's a thing that an actor might say, but as an author, I think it does matter. Um, because the thing is that how we perceive the person, how we see the work, is going to be affected by who we think that person is. And if we view him as a noble or someone else, that's going to affect. We're going to view it with a more aristocratic lens. If we view him as basically someone who came from humble origins, we're going to view it from that lens. So I do think it matters actually, who it is. It's not the only thing that matters, but it is something that definitely matters.
Sure, but again, it's kind of a weird thing that we don't know as much about Shakespeare, even though he is one of the most renowned writers in the world.
Well, think of it this way. Think of it this way: is that okay? You think of email. We've been exchanging emails and all of that.
Yeah.
A lot of emails are a lot of email. A lot of people. We don't have any letters by him. Well, I mean, eventually emails are ephemeral. They're probably going to be deleted sometime. Um, Letters back then were not considered of great value.
Uh
We're not
huh.
we're not seeing that we're not sitting around. You're not sitting around going, well, people are going to value this in 200 years. No, it's like, okay, I wrote to this person, throw it in the trash. And so the reason why we don't have a lot is that documentation was not considered valuable then. And so
Hmm.
what's more likely that there's a conspiracy theory or that just people were careless with
So
documentation.
so you're going full like Occam's razor here. That's what you're saying.
Yeah,
What you're
yeah,
getting at.
essentially. And I'm not saying that Occam's razor always works. Sometimes the simplest explanation is often that now sometimes the evidence can be so great on the other side that it outweighs Occam's razor. But
Sure.
if it's
Yeah.
just yeah, yeah, but if it's just at the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence,
Well, sure.
it,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's a weird what yeah, no, I mean, again, I don't really care about I don't really care about it all that much. Again, I kind of fall where David Tennant did when he talked about it on, I think it was like Stephen Colbert. But,
Yeah.
but yeah, I
But
do see
one of
what
the
you mean. No.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think, and this is a point that I've been thinking about recently, is that I'm actually trying to be, in some ways, kind of like the modern, Shakespeare, in the sense that I'm trying to actually um, revitalize language and make it. I'm trying to find the beauty in language again. I'm trying to get people to care about the beauty of language. I'm trying to get people to care about that aesthetic power. I'm trying to get people to see the beauty of the human condition through language. And that's my ambition. And that's why I think I am a highly ambitious author. I am essentially trying to be the modern Shakespeare in some ways. I'm not just trying to curate or preserve the past because I love Shakespeare, but we've put on a million productions. When are we going to write something that has that same kind of power that's new? That's what I'm trying to do. And that's what I meant by I don't see a lot of authors with literary ambition. I think that I have it in a way that I
Well,
don't really see. I
hmm.
don't see other authors. I don't see other authors having that literary ambition. I think I have it.
Well, okay. I mean that's interesting. So I'm curious what you would think of someone like a Thomas Pynchon or like William Volman. I haven't read Volman. I've read some Pynchon or like even James Elroy, the noir writer. I think they're doing some really interesting
Yeah.
stuff with like language, particularly.
Well, first of all, Pynchon, even though he's still alive, is fairly old now. I wouldn't call him like, I mean, he's around, but he's not like a modern,
That's
contemporary
true.
writer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, and the thing is with Pynchon, I can't really speak to his work because I have Gravity's Rainbow, but I haven't read a lot of it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the thing is with Pynchon is that I actually am am skeptical somewhat of him because the thing is that it's not about his writing, but I actually do not agree with this idea that writers should be reclusive
Oh yeah, you made a
because
video about that.
yeah,
Did you say the problem? Did you make a video about like the problem of being a reclusive author or something like that?
yeah,
That's
yeah.
funny.
Well, the thing is that to me, I think that if you publish your work publicly, you have agreed to a public contract and a relationship with the public, whether you like it or not. And the thing is that, but I think it's counterproductive because what is one of the things that people talk about with Pynchon? They don't always talk about his work. They talk about, okay, it's mysterious Pynchon. Where can we find Pynchon? And that actually, I think, distracts from his work than if he were more open about his work. Actually, and so I actually think it has the opposite effect of what someone like him would actually want.
Well, yeah, but my point being, I think there are some authors that kind of are playing with language a bit, like China or even like China Mieville, for instance. I don't know
Yeah.
again if you've read any of these people, but or even Marlon
Well,
James. I think Marlon James is
yeah,
doing some really fascinating stuff with like voice and
yeah.
narrative voice
Well,
and character voice.
a,
I
a
think there
lot.
are some of them out there.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it though, I think a lot of it though, I think is experimenting. I think for the sake of kind of experiment, it's kind of what you might call almost like a postmodern kind of experimentation where they're trying
Mm-hmm.
to break structure. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about trying to write high quality, poetic, aesthetic prose that is overwhelmingly beautiful, that reveals things about the human condition. And it's that kind of writing that I'm not seeing a lot. I think one of the problems with the modern literary scene is that it's fueled more by what you might call transgression. This idea of have you heard of this book called Flesh
Flesh.
that got won a prize recently? Yeah, it was a book called Flesh that won a
Is it the one that
prize
won the
recently.
Booker?
Yes.
Okay, yeah,
And
yeah,
I
I've
actually
heard of it. Okay, yeah, I saw Brian
yeah,
at Bookish talking about it. Yeah.
yeah, and I found it to be, and someone recommended it to me, but I found it to be, it's essentially a book that glorifies ugliness for the sake of it. I didn't find any beauty in it at all. I thought the writing was amateurish, and I'm like, if this is what people think qualifies for good writing, now we're really doomed. And so, being transgress, being transgressive and experimenting with language is not the same thing as what I'm doing. What I'm trying to do something in a more classical sense and then what a lot of these writers are doing. So I think that's how I would differentiate myself.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, I mean, I see what you mean. Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't. I mean, I think prose is important. I've made videos talking about it, and I also think that there is kind of this trend towards like minimalism and like being as plain as possible, which I think has its perks for sure. I mean, I was trained as a journalist. That's what I went to college for. And what they pound into your head in journalism is keep things simple. You know, do it the Hemingway way.
Well,
Um,
journalism is a different genre than fiction.
that's true.
That philosophy works in journalism. It doesn't quite work for fiction, though,
Well,
in
no, I
my
mean
opinion.
I'm saying I think it has its place, but at the same time, I also
Yeah.
I do think this trend towards more plain language is kind of taking away from like what language can do. You know.
Yeah. To me though, language is not just utilitarian, it's the music of the soul. So to me
Mm.
it is highly important. To me it is more important in some ways even than the narrative itself. For me, I highly prioritize language and the use of it.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it's weird when I see people say like I'll put it this way. I don't believe people when they say like they don't care about prose because I just don't think that's
Hmm.
true. Like I've met people who say they don't care about prose, and they can tell you when something in a book feels wrong, when it reads wrong, when it's So you clearly, I don't know. I'm probably going off on a tangent here.
Hmm.
Probably not making
Yeah.
sense here. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, no. Well, it's I think some people have been so watered down to not care about beauty that it's like they've become almost beauty illiterate, where it's like they can't even recognize beauty when they see it anymore because they've grown up in a culture that doesn't value it. And so it's not, I think that most people deep down, if they've had the proper training, would value it, but it's just that they've been trained by school, by the utilitarianism in school, only write plainly, and by the media and all that to not value those things simply because they haven't been exposed to it.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think minimalism can be done well. I don't know what you think on this, but
I think that minimalism can be done well if if you contrast it with a highly poetic style, but I don't think it's often not done well if it's done just completely and entirely on its own. I think minimalism is a tool that you can use, but it's not a necessary tool for beauty. But it's certainly something I think that has become too pervasive. And it's not that I don't know how to write minimalist. My book over there, Dark Tales of Mystery, was written in a minimalist style. It's not that I don't know how to write like that. It's just that I often choose not to.
yeah, no, I get that. It's just kind of yeah, but I think there is something lost if you don't have that variety. If I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't know if that makes sense, but
To me, it's like it depends on what you mean. Like to me, it's like I think that minimalism can be a tool for contrast, but I think that if you look, for example, in the 19th century, for example, at the Romantic poets, which I'm highly inspired by, and all of that, they completely rejected the concept of minimalism and reason because it was stifling the kind of poetry that could be made at that time. So I do think that a work can
yeah, that's
be
why
can be
I don't really
yeah
read a lot of poetry myself, and I don't want to
yeah
go too
well
much into poetry because, admittedly, I'm not like a big poetry guy. But
yeah,
um,
but
when
what I'm saying is that romanticism, which is the style that I'm in, is one that fundamentally rejects minimalism for the most. I do use it at times as a tool, but I don't think it's necessary in order to create a great work.
oh, for sure, I just I guess that's why I don't like a lot of modern poetry. I think a lot of it is very performative
Yeah.
and just bad. I hate to
Yeah.
say, like people read like the Allen Ginsberg kind. They read like Howl and like, oh, we should do that, and then they just kind of didn't do all the cool stuff that he was doing. And then I'll read something
Yeah.
like Ulysses, which is my favorite poem, and it's night and
Hmm.
day. Like it's
Yeah.
ridiculous the level of skill
Yeah.
that someone like Tennyson had,
Yeah. Well,
or even
the
William
thing is with
Blake. And I'm generally more into
yeah.
William Blake's art than his poetry. But if you read his poetry, like
Yeah.
my
Yeah, it's
God,
quite good. Yeah,
yeah.
Blake is quite good. The poets that I read the most though are Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, John Keats, William Wordsworth. Those are the poets that I love, and I'm especially interested in Byron because I think that Byron had what you might call he used his aesthetic, power in his poetry in order to to basically affirm that he was on top of the kind of that poetic hierarchy, and then almost, even though he predated Nietzsche, and almost in a Nietzschean sort of sense. And I'm very drawn to kind of that aesthetic.
Mm.
Um, um, and one of the things images I'm trying to create now on my channel is this idea that I'm trying to challenge common norms and almost be what you might call almost like the um the bad boy of literature. If that makes any sense.
You're trying to be bad or mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Is that what you're kidding me?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, try not to
Well,
join any wars just for the hell of it anytime soon. Don't
yeah,
don't do that. That's
yeah.
another
Well, I'm
thing,
not.
like it's funny. Again, I'm trying not to get off on like tangents, but like
Yeah,
that's another thing we don't really have anymore. Like there's just like there's no authors anymore that go like maybe William Volman is like the last kind of author who's just like, hey, I'm just gonna go to fucking Afghanistan for some reason and go write about the Mujahideen because why
yeah,
not? You know, you're
yeah.
like what the
That's not.
fuck?
Yeah, that's not what I mean. What I really mean is
No,
someone
I
who
know.
values.
I'm being
Yeah, yeah. I
facetious.
know what you mean. But yeah, yeah. I know. But what I mean is that what I mean, someone who values high aesthetic standards and is willing to not be modest, and is willing to say, I think I'm a talented writer. I believe I am higher in the hierarchy, and I believe a lot of other writers are in fact don't have the aesthetic ability that I have, or they are lower in the hierarchy, and I need to own my own talent, be proud of my talent, and not be modest, because I think far too many writers are modest about their own talents and ability, and I am trying not to do that anymore.
Yeah, no, I that's interesting. That's another thing that interests me. I've noticed that like I don't know if you've read like Gore Vidal or Norman Mailer or any people like that, but I would remember watching. I like to watch like old. Like I'm really fascinated with like politics and like political history. So like I'll watch like old newscasts of like, and they'll have like Gore Vidal there, who was a very well
Yeah.
established novelist, and like he was taken very seriously. He was on TV shows. He was like a man of letters. There's not that anymore.
No,
I'm really and I've
there
always
really isn't.
I've been kind of curious on why that like you don't see like Michael Chabon getting on like a like a
No,
television program.
no. When you see something like Dick Cavett in the '70s, who had a lot of writers like that, Gore Vidal and Norman Mailer, their famous fight debate,
Yeah. Like
where they
imagine
went
like
after each
when people
other.
talk about the divisiveness in this country, I go like, okay, watch the clip where William Buckley Jr. threatens to sock Gore Vidal in the face.
Yeah,
I think we're doing better than I think we're doing okay, guys.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. There's a time where I kind of wished I had grown up in the seven in the I, not grown up, but I wish I had been a writer in the '70s, because that's a decade that I'm like endlessly fascinated by, because I think that it had what you might call a literary sensibility that was after the kind of conservatism that came before. And I'm interested in those decades too, but the '70s is a particular favorite decade of mine, because the conservatism had kind of passed, but it was also kind of before the modern era and technology and all of
yeah,
that.
it was
So I'm
kind
I'm
of
highly.
like the last person who was kind of like that was maybe like, and he wasn't a novelist, but like kind of like Christopher Hitchens. And look, I mean, I have my issues with,
uh,
I don't really care for Hitchens personally, but he was kind of
mhm.
that last, like man of letters who was taken seriously and people like had him on and,
Yeah.
talked about it, generally when he knew what he was
Yeah.
talking about.
I,
Um,
I think that philosophically and theology and when it comes to theology, he was quite weak there. I think
I
that
agree with
he
that.
spoke,
Yeah.
you know, he spoke. I think he spoke with comp. He was very good in the areas that he knew about, but not necessarily in the
Yeah,
areas
like
that he
literature.
didn't
I'm
know
generally
about.
more interested in his like political and like literary work than like
Yes,
his,
yes,
because like I think God's Not Great is there are parts of it that are genuinely embarrassing. Like I'm
yes,
it was one of
yes.
those cases where like he was so big like no one could tell him no anymore, so he just like, oh, I'm gonna
Hmm.
put this out, and people were like, oh, okay, and then
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I try to do as a writer is that I'm someone who's interested in understanding all points of view. And
uh-huh.
so I like to basically immerse myself in all points of view, where I can, if I want to put on the atheist hat and think like the atheist, I can. If I want to put on the Christian hat and think like the Christian, I can. And I think that makes my work far more nuanced and interesting than if I were to just dogmatically try to live in one position all the time.
Yeah, again, I want to jump into Christopher Hitchens there's a lot of rabbit holes in. I was talking yesterday to somebody about comics. There's a lot of rabbit holes in comics. There's a lot of rabbit holes in literature too,
Yeah.
and like philosophy.
Hmm.
Oh my god! But yeah, no,
Hmm.
I agree with you though that I do think he was rather. I don't want to say. I don't know. He was a bright guy, but he was. It's kind of like what you were saying about Twain earlier. There's this kind of presumption and like arrogance in a lot of his work that's always kind of rubbed me the
Yeah.
wrong way. Even though he was
Hmm.
undeniably a very brilliant man. But
Hmm.
my point being, like, you don't really see stuff like that anymore. You don't really see like men of letters come on like David Letterman or David Letterman's not on anymore. Like
Yeah. Well, the night show, the late night talk shows are dead anyway.
that's true. That's true. That
Um,
fair point.
um, you don't see a lot of people like that come on someone like Joe Rogan, for example.
No,
Not a lot, anyway.
no,
You know, you know,
no.
you know, you know. But the thing is, to me, is I don't think it's because that people like that don't exist anymore. It's just that the institutions don't give people like that airtime. I think
Yeah,
it's
they
that
don't care
simple.
about those people anymore. You know.
Exactly. It's only about, the famous people who can. It's only about like, well, like who can increase our
Like
ratings.
I'll put
That's
it this way:
essentially
like
it.
newscasts from like the '70s and '60s are far more interesting than the newscasting now. Because like,
Yeah, exactly. Do you remember Charlie Rose? Charlie Rose used to have a
yeah,
lot of
yeah,
interesting
yeah.
people. Yeah, he had people like David Foster Wallace on.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I
Um,
know. Yeah, I mean, Charlie Rose is like not a great guy or anything, but I
yeah,
I do agree though. He was undeniably an
yeah,
incredible interviewer though.
yeah. He had Arthur Miller on. I love his interviews with Arthur
Oh
Miller
yeah,
and all of that. The trouble is that no one replaced him once he left. No one kind of took up once he was fired or whatever. No one took up that mantle, and I think that's very sad.
yeah. No, and it's like again, it's really like watch something like The Firing Line. Like it is fascinating watching that.
Hmm.
Considering now where we're at with like political news talk shows, it's
Yeah,
just William Buckley talking with like socialists and liberals and all sorts of people
yeah.
about like the political issues of the day and having very
Hmm.
interesting conversations. It's and like having like
Yeah.
authors on like well maybe not Gore Vidal because they both hated each other, but he had like Norman Mailer on, and it's like that
Hmm.
doesn't happen anymore, and it's like it makes me
No,
sad to see.
no, it doesn't. We do not live in a culture that appreciates that sort of thing. I think the death of the long form interview is also unfortunate. Like we have podcasts and things like this now, but
Uh huh.
the long form kind of 45-minute interview where the person sits down and in a very concise manner tries to learn something about the person in 45
Yeah,
minutes,
exactly.
that's sort of gone.
Yeah, that doesn't exist anymore, and it's really
You know
sad
that
because it's
that
like,
really doesn't exist anymore. And I think that we can't have a literary culture unless we have a culture that actually cares about it. But again, like I said earlier, on one hand you have something like the right that tends to say, "Oh, we want traditional values," but then they destroy essentially in any kind of instant. They don't actually care about that because they don't care about art because then they would try to make that kind of art, but instead they just defund art programs, don't care about it. And then you have the left, which is kind of just uses art as a form to celebrate identity politics. They don't actually care about the aesthetic. They don't
I
actually
like
care
we've
about the
come full
aesthetic of it.
circle on the woke
You know,
thing.
yeah, yeah, we have. But what I'm saying though is that this is not a particular political problem or a political side. It's an anti-intellectual problem that exists across the political spectrum on all sides.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's funny no, but it's like do you imagine like Gore Vidal in today's like American political like he would I don't know if he'd be
Yeah.
horrified, and I'll admit I think Gore Vidal was a rather conceited jerk, but
Yes, he was. He was in
undeniably a
many
brilliant
ways.
mind that's worth
Yeah.
listening to. Again,
Yeah.
kind of
I
like
had no.
Christopher Hitchens, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, I think that people
uh,
like them though. I think people like them though are people who they they obviously had but spoke with confidence about things. But to me, many of them did not have a lot of depth once you kind of probe underneath that. And that's it's kind of my very definition of what I would call a pseudo intellectual. They're interesting at first, but once you probe beneath, especially with Hitchens, there sometimes isn't a lot there.
that's true. Yeah, especially his
Hmm.
religious debates where you're like that's not how that you
Yeah,
can't just disprove religion with facts and like that's a meme for a
yeah,
reason.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
honestly glad that Hitchens died before the internet came around, because oh my god, he would be memed to death today if he were
Yeah.
still
Wait, hey,
alive today.
did you see recently the news story about how Richard Dawkins fell in love with the chatbot?
That was great because I hate Richard Dawkins,
Yeah.
and that was just like I'm like, this is great. He deserves this.
You
Fuck you, Richard Dawkins. I
you
hate this
you
guy.
can't even make it up. You
No,
cannot make that up.
you've been ranting about how religion's a mind virus, but you get suckered by Claude, which by the way, my dad actually uses Claude, but yeah, which is a very
Well,
impressive AI. But like,
yeah.
you're getting suckered by Claude. Come on, dude.
I sometimes use AI chatbots to kind of brainstorm, but I don't think that they're human,
Well, yeah, exactly.
in any
Yeah.
stretch of the imagination at all.
Oh my god. Oh, that's funny. Oh, I love that. Oh, man. Anyway, we've been going on for a while. I've really enjoyed
Yeah,
this conversation, but I do
yeah,
have
I
other
have
things I
to.
want to do this evening, so yeah.
Yeah. So is there anything else you want to ask me or talk about before we go?
I mean, not at the moment. Maybe I'll like, I mean, maybe I'll have you on again if I ever do like a Moby Dick, and you can explain it to a plebeian such as myself.
Yeah, well, I've enjoyed this. And now that I've actually know how this works, I'm far less reluctant about it than I was,
Yeah, I'm glad we got
going
this
in.
together.
Because I've never been on a podcast before, so this was a new experience for me. But I've enjoyed it a lot, and would definitely like to do it again. So keep that in mind.
I definitely will. I definitely will. Yeah. I mean, as I like to do before I end these things, if you have any like social media or anything like that, feel free to share it.
Okay, I'm on YouTube. I am on, of course, I'm on TikTok too. Well, TikTok is kind of a place where
Oh God,
YouTube is,
I've
you know,
avoided
you,
TikTok. I kind of think TikTok's
yeah,
a bad idea, but God
yeah,
bless you if you've gone into the mines for that.
yeah. Well, TikTok is kind of the place where I talk to kind of so there are some intellectual peers there that I talk to that I'm close to there. It's not really where my audience is growing. It's growing more on YouTube now, but I kind of TikTok is kind of like the back room, so to speak, you know.
Mm.
And I'm on Instagram, but Instagram, I get there's Instagram is a ghost town. I can't get any traction on Instagram at all. But I'm on there as well just for some variety. And so yeah, that's my social media.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. This I definitely did. And check out Joseph's channel. He has some interesting ideas. I'm sure there
You
will
you might
be.
you might want to link the channel below or
I
something,
will.
or
Yeah.
maybe.
I link every one I do. So
And
it's all
and
good.
I might link this video in my community section to show people as well for people who are interested in that.
Fair enough.
That's
Anyway, well, hopefully everyone enjoyed this as well. Until next time, thank you, Joseph, for joining me.
thank thank you.
All right.